He could have kept it. No one would have ever known. The wallet sat in his palm like a quiet temptation, stuffed with cash, cards, and a life he would never have. His daughter needed medicine. The rent was 3 weeks overdue. And Ethan Walker, a man who fixed broken machines for a living, stood in the rain making the only choice that would either save him or destroy him completely. This is the story of two people with nothing in common except the truth, and how that single thread pulled them both back from the edge of losing everything that mattered. If this story speaks to you, hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The rain came in sideways that Tuesday morning, the kind that didn't announce itself with thunder or dramatic clouds, but simply arrived, cold, persistent, and indifferent to whatever anyone had planned for the day. Ethan Walker had planned to be gone by 7:15. He'd set 3 alarms. The first 2 he'd slept through, the third he'd silenced with the flat of his hand before it could wake Lily. She'd had a bad night, coughing in that dry, shallow way that made his chest tighten every time he heard it. And when she finally went quiet around 4 in the morning, he'd sat in the doorway of her room for another 20 minutes, just listening to her breathe. By the time he'd actually gotten up, showered in water that went cold halfway through, and found a clean enough shirt at the bottom of his laundry basket, it was nearly 8. He was already late. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. A brown canvas thing, slightly too big across the shoulders, bought secondhand 2 winters ago. And checked on Lily one more time. She was still sleeping, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face soft and untroubled in a way it never quite was when she was awake and asking questions he didn't have good answers to. She was 6 years old and already sharper than he was comfortable with. He left a note on the nightstand. "Morning, Bug. Cereal's in the cabinet, the blue box. Mrs. Okafor will come by at 9. Don't open the door for anyone else. Love, Dad." Mrs. Okafor was their neighbor, a retired school teacher in her 60s who watched Lily on the mornings Ethan had early jobs. He paid her when he could, which lately wasn't as often as he should have. She never said anything about it. That somehow made it worse. He took the stairs down from the 3rd floor. The elevator had been out of service for 6 weeks, which the building management seemed entirely unbothered by, and pushed through the front door into the rain. Pulaski Avenue was already grinding with morning traffic, the buses hissing at their stops, commuters hunched under umbrellas moving in tight, irritated streams on the sidewalk. Ethan turned up his collar and started walking toward the parking structure on Michigan where he kept his van. The van was a 2009 Chevy Express that he'd bought off a guy in Pilsen for $3,200 18 months ago. It needed a new serpentine belt. The passenger side window had to be cranked by hand because the electric motor had burned out, and the heater worked fine on high, but only on high, which made for uncomfortable driving in October and downright miserable driving in January. But it ran, and it was his, and it had his name on the side. Walker Repair and Maintenance, 773-408-2291, which was all he'd needed to start taking jobs. He did appliance work mostly. Washers, dryers, dishwashers, the occasional commercial refrigerator. He'd gotten into HVAC a little when a guy he knew needed coverage. And he'd done some generator repair out in the suburbs when the money got tight, which was increasingly always. He wasn't a licensed electrician or a plumber. He was a man who understood how mechanical things failed and could usually figure out how to make them work again. It was a skill he'd picked up working with his uncle through his early 20s, one he'd never expected to build a life around but had. He crossed the intersection at Michigan, stepping around a puddle that had swallowed most of the curb cut, and that's when he saw it. It was lying half against the concrete lip of the curb, partly sheltered by the bumper of a parked black Mercedes. A wallet, thick, dark brown leather, the kind that was stitched at the edges and monogrammed in small gold lettering. It looked new. It looked expensive. It was sitting in a thin stream of rainwater working its way toward the gutter. Ethan stopped. He looked around, at the commuters moving past, at the woman on her phone 20 feet ahead, at the delivery guy pulling a dolly across the intersection. No one was crouching down to look for something lost. No one was turning around. He leaned down and picked it up. The leather was heavy in a way cheap wallets weren't, and it stayed rigid when he turned it over. The monogram was VH in thin serif letters. He opened it, and the first thing he saw was cash. Several bills in the front pocket, a mix of 50s and what looked like 200s. He didn't count it. He folded it shut immediately, the way you might close a door you'd accidentally opened into someone's private space. Behind the cash slots were cards, black credit cards, the kind with no numbers embossed on the front, an Illinois ID. The photo was a woman, younger looking than the name suggested somehow, dark-haired and serious in the way ID photos always make people look slightly severe. The name on the ID read Victoria Ann Hale. The address listed was a street in Lincoln Park he vaguely recognized as expensive. In a small interior pocket, folded once, a business card. Clean white stock, minimal design. Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer. Hale Technologies. An address on Wacker Drive. A phone number. Ethan stood there in the rain with the wallet in his hand. He thought about Lily's medication. The refill she needed by Friday, the prescription cough medication that her pediatrician had said wasn't urgent but also wasn't optional, the one that cost $68 at the CVS on Ashland because the generic wasn't in stock, and the insurance they barely kept active had a deductible he hadn't met this year, and probably wouldn't. He thought about the $73 in his checking account and the $140 in cash he had in his jacket pocket, which had to cover gas, food, and Mrs. Okafor at minimum for the next week. He thought about the money in this wallet, which was probably more than all of that combined. He thought about it for maybe 12 seconds. Then he tucked the wallet into his inside jacket pocket, zipped it, and kept walking. But he turned left instead of right, heading away from the parking structure toward the nearest cross street, where he pulled out his phone and searched Hale Technologies, Chicago. The result that came back was immediate. A glass tower on Wacker Drive with a company website that had the kind of spare, confident design that meant they didn't need to try very hard. The company was described in the first line of the About page as a leading force in enterprise infrastructure technology and data solutions with operations across North America and Europe. Below that was a photo of Victoria Hale, a proper one, not an ID photo, seated at a large desk, one hand resting on the surface, expression controlled and direct. The article attached to the photo was from a Chicago business journal, 18 months old. Victoria Hale, 30, takes sole command of Hale Tech. Following father's retirement. He looked at the photo for a moment. She looked like someone who didn't misplace things. He put his phone away and started back toward his van. The job that morning was a residential building in Logan Square, a property management company that used him semi-regularly for appliance issues across their portfolio. Broken dryer in Unit 3C, possibly a heating element, possibly just a tripped thermal fuse. It was the kind of job that should take 40 minutes and sometimes took 3 hours and occasionally turned into something that required a second visit and a part ordered from a distributor in Ohio. He made it there by 8:50. The super, a man named Terrence, who communicated almost entirely in single syllables and mild disappointment, led him into the unit without comment. The tenants were out. Ethan pulled the dryer away from the wall, checked the back panel, ran the diagnostic sequence he'd memorized years ago, and found a blown thermal fuse inside 15 minutes. He had a replacement in his kit. He swapped it, ran the drum for a cycle, confirmed the heat element was drawing current properly, pushed the dryer back, noted the time on his work order, and let himself out. Terrence paid him in cash. $115. He sat in his van for a minute and looked at the money. He added it to what was already in his jacket. He had another job in the afternoon, a commercial dishwasher at a restaurant in River North that had stopped cycling, but nothing else until then. He had time to go to Wacker Drive. He told himself he was just going to drop it at the front desk. Leave it with whoever handled lost property, get a receipt if they gave one, and leave. 5 minutes, 10 at most. He pulled into traffic. Hale Technologies occupied floors 14 through 22 of a glass tower on Wacker Drive that also housed a law firm, an architecture firm, and what the lobby directory described with suspicious vagueness as a private equity advisory group. The building itself was the kind of structure that expressed its cost in restraint. All pale stone and dark glass and surfaces so clean they made Ethan aware suddenly of his wet jacket and his worn work boots leaving faint damp marks on the polished floor. The lobby was tall and quiet. A security desk ran across most of the far wall, staffed by 2 people in matching gray uniforms. Off to the right, a bank of elevators. To the left, a long reception counter, where a young woman in a white blouse was typing something with the particular focused blankness of someone deeply involved in their own work. Ethan approached the security desk. The guard closest to him, a heavy-set man in his 40s with a name tag reading D. Morrison, looked up with the practiced blankness of someone whose job involved looking at strangers all day without actually seeing them. "Help you?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I found something this morning that belongs to someone in your building. A wallet. I'm looking to return it." Morrison's expression didn't shift much, but something in it recalibrated slightly. Not toward suspicion exactly, but toward a particular flavor of corporate-adjacent skepticism that Ethan recognized as the default setting of anyone who spent their days as a gatekeeper. "You found it where?" "Michigan Avenue, near the curb. About a block from here, block and a half." "And you know it belongs to someone here?" "There's a business card inside. Victoria Hale, CEO." Something moved across Morrison's face. He straightened slightly. "You have ID." Ethan reached into his back pocket and produced his license. Morrison looked at it, looked at him, handed it back. He picked up a phone receiver and murmured something into it, half turned away. Ethan waited. "Her assistant will be down," Morrison said after a moment. "Take a seat." There was a seating area to the right of the elevator bank, gray upholstered chairs, low glass table, a small sculpture that was either very expensive or a very confident joke. Ethan sat. He was aware of the security guard watching him with a particular kind of patience that was also a kind of watchfulness. He didn't take it personally. He'd spent enough of his life in rooms where he was the person who didn't obviously belong to understand that the watchfulness wasn't always about him specifically. He waited 11 minutes. He checked his phone twice, no messages from Mrs. Okafor, which was good, and watched the elevator doors open and close twice for people who weren't coming for him. The third time the elevator opened, a woman came out who was not the type of person who typically came to collect lost wallets. She was maybe 26, dressed in the precise, slightly severe way of someone who managed other people's schedules for a living. Dark slacks, a silk blouse the color of pale jade, hair pulled back without being severe about it. She moved across the lobby with the walk of someone who was rarely uncertain about where she was going. "Mr. Walker?" He stood. "Yeah." "I'm Diane, Miss Hale's executive assistant." She didn't extend her hand, but her tone wasn't unfriendly, more businesslike, the way a doctor's office receptionist isn't unfriendly, but also isn't quite warm. "You said you found something that belongs to Ms. Hale?" "A wallet." He reached inside his jacket and produced it. "I found it on Michigan Avenue this morning, near the curb outside the parking structure. There was a business card inside with the address here." Diane took the wallet from him and looked at it. At the monogram, at the condition of it. Her face didn't show much, but there was a fractional pause that he registered without quite knowing what to make of. "Do you know if anything was taken out?" she asked. "No," he said. "I opened it to find an ID, that's all." She looked at him. It was a brief look, measuring without being rude about it. "If you'll come with me," she said, "Ms. Hale would like to thank you personally." Ethan hadn't expected that. "She doesn't need to. I just wanted to make sure it got back." "I understand," Diane said, and then said nothing else, which wasn't exactly an acknowledgement that he had any say in the matter. She turned toward the elevator and he followed, because it seemed like that was what was happening. The elevator opened on the 19th floor directly into a reception area that was, again, the kind of space that communicated expense through what it chose not to do. No branding on the walls, no motivational text in vinyl lettering, no framed articles, just clean surfaces, good lighting, and the faint smell of something that might have been an actual plant arrangement rather than a synthetic air freshener. Diane walked him through a short hallway and then paused at the end of it, in front of a set of frosted glass doors. She knocked twice, which struck him as slightly odd given that she was presumably the person who organized access to whatever was behind those doors, and then opened them. The office was large and faced the river. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind that made the gray October sky feel like a design element. The desk was positioned toward the far end, at a slight angle to the windows, and behind it, except not behind it, more to one side, was Victoria Hale. She was in a wheelchair. He hadn't known that. The photograph on the company website hadn't shown it, or if it had, he hadn't retained it. It recalibrated the moment in a way he couldn't immediately process, so he simply didn't, filed it somewhere peripheral and focused on the fact of her, which was significant enough on its own. She was younger looking in person than she'd seemed in the photo. The photo had dressed her in severity. The reality was more complicated. She was sharp-featured, dark-haired, with the kind of posture that came from deliberate effort and not natural ease. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a black shirt, and she held herself in the chair with a stillness that was clearly practiced. Not the stillness of someone at rest, but the stillness of someone who had decided not to show movement as effort. She was watching him with dark eyes that were neither warm nor unfriendly, but extremely attentive. "Mr. Walker," she said. Her voice was even, precise, with the cadence of someone accustomed to being the person in the room whose sentences didn't trail off. "Ms. Hale, sit down, please." There were 2 chairs in front of the desk. He sat in the nearer one. Diane placed the wallet on the corner of the desk and took a position near the door that was slightly behind Ethan and slightly to his left, present but peripheral. Victoria Hale picked up the wallet and turned it over once, the way he'd turned it over on the street. She set it back down without opening it. "Diane tells me you found it near the parking structure on Michigan." "Just past the curb cut on the south side, yeah. It was next to a black Mercedes." She nodded once, unhurriedly. "And you came here directly?" "I had a job this morning. I came after." "A job?" "Appliance repair. Logan Square." She seemed to take note of that, though her expression didn't change. "You could have called," she said. Not accusatory, just observational, the way she might note a discrepancy in a report. "The card had an address," he said. "Seemed straightforward." A small silence. She was still watching him with that quality of attention that made him feel slightly observed without quite feeling examined. It was uncomfortable in a way that wasn't hostile, and he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Was anything missing?" she asked. "I didn't take anything, if that's what you're asking." "That's what I'm asking." "No," he said. "Nothing's missing." She held his gaze for a moment. "I believe you," she said, and the directness of it, not "thank you for being honest" or "that's reassuring," but simply "I believe you," stated plainly, was almost startling. "Okay," he said. "Can I ask you something?" He spread his hands slightly. "Sure." "Why did you come?" she said. "Not why did you return it. Why did you come here personally, instead of dropping it at the desk downstairs or calling, or leaving it with building security?" It was a good question. He hadn't really examined it. "I wanted to make sure it actually got to you," he said after a second. "Not just to your building." "Why does the distinction matter to you?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "It just seemed like the right thing wasn't leaving it with someone and hoping it made it the rest of the way." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Most people would have kept it." "Maybe. The cash, at least." "Probably. But not you." He looked at her steadily. "No." She seemed to sit with that. Outside the windows, a barge was moving slowly down the river, orange and unhurried against the gray water. He noticed her eyes move to it briefly and come back. "How old is your daughter?" she said. He went very still. "Excuse me?" "You have a daughter," she said. Not a question. He felt something shift in his chest. Not quite alarm, but a cousin of it. "How do you know that?" "You have a child's drawing on your key fob." She nodded toward his jacket pocket, where his keys were clipped. "A sun and some stick figures, the kind 6-year-olds do." He looked down. The key fob was visible through the top of his pocket, a laminated card Lily had made him for Father's Day, which he'd had laminated at the FedEx store because she'd asked if he could keep it forever. He'd forgotten it was clipped there. "6," he said after a moment. "She's 6. What's her name?" "Why?" Victoria Hale didn't flinch at the directness. "I'm making conversation," she said. "Lily. That's a nice name." She said it without sentimentality, which somehow made it feel more sincere than if she'd cooed over it. He waited a beat. "Look, I should probably get going. I've got another job this afternoon and I need to—" "Mr. Walker." She said it calmly, but it had a quality of interruption that wasn't rude so much as precise. "I'd like to offer you a reward." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't," she said. "I want to." "That's also not necessary." She studied him for a second. "You're uncomfortable with it." "A little, yeah." "Why?" "Because I didn't return it expecting anything back," he said. "It was just the right thing to do. Putting a price on it makes it feel like something else." She considered this with the same quiet attention she seemed to give everything. What if I told you I wasn't offering cash? She said. Then I'd wonder what you were offering instead. The smallest thing happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. Medical benefits, she said. Through the Hale Foundation. We run a community health partnership. I could have someone reach out to your daughter's pediatrician. I'm not a charity case, he said. He heard how it sounded. Too sharp, too quick. But he didn't walk it back. I didn't say you were. It came out sounding like one. She shook her head. It came out sounding like I have resources that could help someone who did a decent thing in a world where that's rarer than it should be. She paused. That's not charity, that's arithmetic. He didn't have an immediate answer to that. Think about it, she said, which was a different kind of dismissal than he'd expected. Less like she was done with him, and more like she was giving him room. You don't have to decide anything today. She picked up a pen from the surface of her desk. Not reaching for it, it was simply there, within the small and practiced geography of things she kept within arm's reach, and wrote something on a card, which she set at the edge of the desk facing him. That's my direct number, she said, not the front desk. If you decide you want to talk more about this, you can reach me there. He picked up the card. It was the same design as the business card in the wallet, but this one had a handwritten number on the back. Thank you, he said, which was inadequate, but was what he had. Thank you, Mr. Walker, she said, and then something he didn't expect. I hope Lily feels better. He stood, nodded, and Diane materialized at the door to walk him out. He didn't look back, but he had the distinct and inexplicable sensation of being watched all the way to the elevator. He sat in his van in the parking structure for 10 minutes before he started the engine. He'd put the business card in his shirt pocket, which was where things went when he wasn't sure what to do with them. His shirt pocket held a surprising variety of things: folded receipts, a screw that he'd meant to throw away, a note from Lily's teacher about a field trip that needed a permission slip he still hadn't returned. He thought about the way Victoria Hale had watched him, not the way most people watched him when he showed up at their door for a service call, with the particular half-attention of someone who needs a thing fixed and would prefer to conduct the interaction as efficiently as possible. She'd watched him like she was actually interested in what she was looking at, which was unusual enough that it stayed with him. He thought about her knowing about Lily, about noticing the key fob. He wasn't sure whether that was perceptive or invasive or both. He thought about the cash in the wallet, which he hadn't counted and had tried not to estimate, and about the $68 Lily's prescription was going to cost, and the fact that after Terrence had paid him this morning, he had just over $230 to last the week. He didn't think about the offer for very long, because thinking about it made his chest do something complicated. He started the van and pulled out into traffic. The River North job took 3 hours. The commercial dishwasher was a Hobart FM 66, which he hadn't worked on before, but which was, at its core, a machine with identifiable failure points and a service manual he'd been able to pull up on his phone. The problem turned out to be in the wash arm assembly. One of the lower spray arms had cracked along a seam and was misdirecting water pressure, which was causing the cycle sensor to read a completion condition that wasn't actually there. He'd been able to source a replacement arm from a restaurant supply company 8 blocks away and install it same day, which was the kind of luck that didn't always happen, and that the restaurant manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Frank, who had the demeanor of someone who'd been dealing with equipment problems all day, seemed genuinely grateful for. Frank paid him in cash, $350, and offered him a plate of food from the prep kitchen, which Ethan accepted because he hadn't eaten since a granola bar at 7, and because turning down food when it was offered freely felt like the wrong kind of pride. He sat in the back of the restaurant near the service entrance and ate grilled chicken and roasted vegetables with the focused quietness of a man who was used to eating alone in between things. He thought about what he was going to tell Lily when he got home. She always asked how his day had been, with the specific interest of a child who was still in the phase of believing her parents' day was as interesting to hear about as a story. He told her about the machines, usually, the weird problems, the things that weren't supposed to work but didn't, the satisfying click of a part fitting correctly into place. She liked the diagnostic parts, the figuring it out. She liked it when he explained why things failed. He wasn't sure how to explain what had happened today. I found a wallet full of money. Bug. Belonged to a woman who runs a big company. I gave it back. She has a nice office and she noticed your drawing. He'd leave out the part where he'd sat in the parking structure for 10 minutes trying to understand why he felt unsettled. He finished eating, thanked Frank, and drove home through the tail end of the evening rush, the city pressing in on all sides with its particular exhausted urgency. Mrs. Okafor was watching a Nigerian soap opera when he knocked on her door. She answered with the slightly distracted expression of someone pulled away from a cliffhanger and told him Lily had eaten lunch, hadn't napped, and had spent an hour building something with cardboard boxes in the living room that she claimed was a veterinary hospital. She charged me $3 to look at my thumb, Mrs. Okafor said. Did she fix it? She put a Band-Aid on it and said to come back in 2 days. She paused. She's a good doctor. He thanked her and gave her $40, which was less than he owed her. She took it without comment and went back to her show. He let himself into the apartment with his own key. Lily was in the living room, still in the construction phase of what was, in fact, an elaborate cardboard structure that took up most of the floor space between the couch and the radiator. She'd labeled sections of it with a marker in her unsteady 6-year-old handwriting. Dogs, cats, other, emergency. Emergency has a different spelling, he said from the doorway. I know, she said, without looking up from where she was taping a section of cereal box to a piece of corrugated cardboard. But I like mine better. He came in and sat on the floor beside her. She had her mother's hands, long-fingered and precise, and her mother's focused expression when she was building something. He watched her work for a moment, the careful way she pressed the tape down with her thumb, the small frown of concentration. How's your cough? He said. Fine. It was bad last night. I know. It's fine now. He touched her forehead briefly. No fever, he didn't think, but cooler hands weren't the most reliable diagnostic. We'll get your medicine Friday, he said. She looked up at him then, with the particular perception of a child who has spent most of her life with only one parent and has therefore developed a calibrated ear for the difference between this is the plan and I'm saying this so you feel okay. Is that the actual plan? She said, or the say it so I feel okay plan? The actual plan, he said, because tonight he believed it was. She studied him for another second with those dark eyes and then went back to her construction. Okay, she said, can you hand me the scissors? He handed her the scissors. He sat on the floor of his apartment in the particular comfortable exhaustion of the end of a day, and he watched his daughter build something that needed to exist. And outside the window, the rain came back, quieter now, more patient. The business card was still in his shirt pocket. He didn't take it out, but he didn't forget it was there. 3 days later, Lily's cough had gotten worse. It wasn't dramatic worse. She wasn't running a fever. She wasn't struggling to breathe. She was still eating and going to school and building increasingly ambitious structures out of whatever cardboard came through their apartment. But the cough had moved from the shallow, dry variety to something with more depth to it, a productive sound that the pediatrician's nurse, when Ethan called the advice line on Thursday morning, described as worth monitoring closely in the careful language medical professionals used when they wanted to communicate concern without triggering panic. Can she be seen today? Psst, he asked. Dr. Reyes has an opening at 4:30. I'll take it. He rearranged his afternoon, called the building manager in Humboldt Park, who'd been trying to schedule him for a furnace inspection and moved it to the following week, texted Mrs. Okafor, picked Lily up from school himself at 3. She fell asleep in the van on the way to the clinic, which worried him more than the cough. She was not a child who napped. Dr. Reyes was a compact woman in her 40s who had been Lily's pediatrician since Lily was 18 months old, and who had the particular manner of a doctor who'd chosen pediatrics because she actually liked children rather than because it seemed practical. She listened to Lily's chest, asked her questions with the kind of directness children responded to, did not talk over Lily's head to Ethan as if Lily weren't present. Bronchitis, she said, when Lily was pulling her shirt back down. Not severe, but we want to catch it before it decides to become severe. She wrote a prescription. This is an antibiotic, and I also want her on a mucolytic, a medication that helps clear the mucus. The mucolytic isn't covered well by your current plan, but we can try the generic. The generic's not in stock, he said. He knew this because he'd called. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said, in a tone that meant she'd already been thinking about this. The brand name runs about 60 at most pharmacies. I can write it so she gets the minimum effective course. Should be enough with the antibiotic. How much for both? She did the math in her head, which told him she'd done it before. Probably 90 to 95 total at CVS, maybe 85 if you use the GoodRx discount. He did not say anything. He looked at Lily, who was swinging her legs off the examination table and examining the cartoon animal poster on the wall with the detached interest of someone who had been to this office many times and had already memorized most of its decorations. "I can talk to the pharmaceutical rep," Dr. Reyes said quietly. "Sometimes there are samples. I'll figure it out," he said. "I always do." She didn't push. She finished writing the prescription and handed it to him and said Lily should be seen again in a week. And Lily said goodbye to the cartoon animals in a tone of fond farewell that would have been funny if Ethan's mind hadn't been doing rapid and unhappy arithmetic. He had $112 in his account. He got Lily settled in the van with a book she'd brought from school and walked 20 feet away and took out his phone. He opened his contacts and stared at the name he'd added 3 days ago. V. Hale. Direct. He told himself he wasn't going to call. He stood on the sidewalk outside the pediatric clinic in the dusk of a Thursday in October, with his daughter coughing softly in the van 20 feet away, and he felt the particular defeat of a man who keeps making the right choice and keeps ending up in the same place anyway. He put his phone back in his pocket. He went back to the van. "Ready to go?" he said. Lily looked up from her book. "Is it going to be okay?" she said. "Yeah, Bug," he said. "It's going to be okay." He started the engine. He drove to the CVS on Ashland. He handed over the prescription and his insurance card and waited while the pharmacist ran it and came back to tell him what he already knew. He paid $91 for 2 medications, which left him with $21 in his account. He drove home. He made Lily soup from a can and sat with her while she ate it at the kitchen table. And then he gave her the first dose of the antibiotic with water and read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together. A middle-grade novel about a girl who communicates with her late grandmother through an old radio that had been Ethan's idea and was probably slightly above Lily's reading level, but which she refused to abandon. He read until she fell asleep. He sat at the kitchen table afterward with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and took out his phone. He held it in his hands for a while. Then he took out Victoria Hale's card and looked at the handwritten number on the back of it. He didn't call. He didn't text. He just sat with the card in his hand, looking at it, trying to understand what kind of man he was. The one who asked for help, or the one who didn't. He was still sitting there when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Walker. This is Diane Chen, Ms. Hale's assistant. I hope this is an okay time to reach out. Ms. Hale asked me to follow up. She wanted you to know that if you decided to speak with her again, she's available tomorrow morning at 8. No obligation. D. Chen, Hale Technologies." He stared at the message for a long moment. He set the phone face down on the table. He thought about the wallet lying in the rain at the edge of the gutter. He thought about the 12 seconds he'd stood there looking at it. He thought about the woman in the wheelchair behind the desk with the river view who had noticed a laminated drawing on a keychain. He thought about Lily sleeping in the next room with the particular quiet of a sick child. He turned the phone face up and typed, "I can be there at 8. He put the phone down and finished his cold coffee and didn't let himself think too hard about what he'd just agreed to, because thinking too hard about things at 11:30 at night in an empty kitchen was rarely the kind of thinking that helped. He went to bed. Outside, the city did what cities did, kept moving, indifferent and alive, full of people carrying their particular weights through the dark. He was 12 minutes early, which was not intentional so much as a consequence of leaving the apartment at 7:15 because Lily had woken at 6 with a coughing fit that had taken 20 minutes to settle, and once she'd gone back to sleep and Mrs. Okafor had arrived and Ethan had made it to his van, he'd found himself driving through unusually thin Friday morning traffic that delivered him to Wacker Drive with time to spare. He sat in the parking structure across the street for 9 of those 12 minutes. He drank the last of the coffee from the thermos he'd filled at home, lukewarm by now, slightly overbrewed, and watched people move in and out of the building's lobby through the glass front and tried to understand what he thought he was doing. He wasn't entirely sure. The text to Diane last night had felt like a decision, but in the clear gray light of a Friday morning, it felt more like a thing he'd done before he'd fully decided to do it, which was a distinction that mattered to him and that he couldn't now undo. He was here. He told them he'd be here. He would go in, hear whatever Victoria Hale had to say, and then decide what to do about it from a position of actual information rather than the positions he'd been cycling through in his kitchen at midnight. That was the plan. He got out of the van at 7:58. Diane met him in the lobby this time, which meant she'd been watching for him. She was wearing something darker today, navy, and she had a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other, and she moved toward him with the particular efficiency of someone who was already 3 tasks into her morning. "Mr. Walker, good morning." She turned without breaking stride, and he fell into step beside her. "Ms. Hale is in early today. She'll see you right away." "Does she usually come in this early?" Diane glanced at him sideways. "Ms. Hale is usually here before I am," she said, which he read as a non-answer that was also somehow a complete answer. They rode the elevator up in the particular compressed silence of 2 people who don't know each other well enough to fill 19 floors with small talk. He noticed that Diane had the look of someone managing a significant amount of information at all times. Her eyes moved to the tablet twice during the ride, though she didn't open anything on it. The 19th floor looked the same as it had 2 days ago. Same clean surfaces, same quality of light, same faint smell of something natural and expensive that he still couldn't identify. Diane walked him through the hallway and knocked twice at the frosted glass doors and opened them. Victoria Hale was at her desk, but differently than she'd been before. She had 2 monitors open and a phone receiver resting on her shoulder, and she was writing something on a notepad while talking, and when Diane opened the door, she held up one finger without looking up. The universal signal for one moment that in her case felt less like an apology and more like a directive. He stood near the door. Diane had already left. "The filing deadline is not negotiable," Victoria was saying into the phone. Her voice had a different quality than it had in their first meeting, tighter, with an edge of controlled impatience, the voice of someone who'd been managing a problem since before breakfast. "Tell Marcus that if he needs another week, he should have started a month ago. We file Thursday." "Yes, Thursday." A pause. "I understand he's concerned. He can be concerned and still file on time." Another pause, shorter. "Thank you, but—" She set the receiver down and finished the sentence she'd been writing on the notepad. Then she looked up. "Mr. Walker?" Something in her face shifted from the expression she'd had on the phone call to something more contained. Not warmer, exactly, but more deliberate. "Sit down." He sat. "Busy morning." "Every morning is a busy morning," she said, without complaint, just factually. She put down her pen and gave him the same quality of attention she'd given him on Wednesday. Complete, unhurried, a little unsettling. "I'm glad you came. Your assistant's text last night was—" He paused, choosing a word. "Unexpected." "I told her to reach out," Victoria said. "I should have done it myself." She said this matter-of-factly, not self-critically, but as someone noting a process she'd have done differently. "How is your daughter?" He looked at her for a second. "She has bronchitis," and he said, She's okay. She'll be okay." "I'm sorry to hear that." A brief pause. "Did she get her medication?" "Yeah." She seemed to hear something in the brevity of that answer, but didn't press on it. "I wanted to talk to you more about what I mentioned on Wednesday," she said. "The Hale Foundation's Community Health Partnership." "You said you wanted to." He kept his voice even. "I'm listening." She turned slightly in her chair to face him more directly, and he noticed again the deliberateness of how she moved. Every adjustment considered, nothing careless. "The foundation runs a program called MedBridge," she said. "We partner with a network of healthcare providers in Chicago to extend coverage to families who fall through the gaps in the standard insurance system. It's not government-funded. It operates through private endowment and corporate partnerships. About 4,200 families are currently enrolled. And you're offering to enroll us. I'm offering to have someone from the foundation reach out to Dr. She glanced at something on her desk, a note he hadn't seen her write. "Dr. Reyes, Lily's pediatrician, to discuss coverage options for ongoing care." He was quiet for a moment. "You looked up her doctor." "Diane made some calls," she said, and she said it in a tone that acknowledged there was a reason he might find that intrusive. "I wanted to be specific, not vague. Vague offers are easy to make and easy to decline." "So are specific ones," he said, a slight pause. "Fair enough." He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "I need to ask you something, Ms. Hale, and I need you to answer it honestly." Her expression didn't change. "All right, why does it matter to you whether I accept this or not? You run a foundation that serves 4,000 families. You don't need to personally recruit the guy who returned your wallet." She held his gaze. For a moment, she said nothing, and he had the sense that whatever she was deciding wasn't about whether to answer him, but about how accurate to be. "You're right," she said. "I don't need to. The program operates fine without my personal involvement in individual cases." She paused. "I made an exception." "Why?" "Because most people who walk through that door come because they want something from me," she said. "You came to give something back. That's unusual enough that I noticed it." "That's a reason to notice," he said. "That's not a reason to run a background check on my daughter's doctor." Something shifted in her face. Not quite a flinch, but the closest thing to one he'd seen from her. "You're right," she said again. "That was overreach. I apologize." He hadn't expected the apology to come that quickly or that cleanly. It threw him slightly. "Okay," he said after a beat. "Do you accept it?" "Yeah," he said. "I do." She nodded once. Then, "Does that change your answer about the program?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I don't like accepting things I haven't earned." "You returned a wallet," she said. "Most people don't. That's a pretty low bar for earning medical coverage." "You'd be surprised," she said quietly, "how few people clear it." He sat back in his chair. He wasn't sure what to do with that. The flatness of it, the absence of performance in the way she said it. She wasn't trying to sell him on anything. She was stating something she appeared to actually believe. And there was something about the absence of salesmanship that made it harder to deflect. "Tell me more about the program," he said. Well, she talked for 20 minutes, which was, he had the sense, longer than she typically talked about anything in a single stretch. She wasn't the kind of person who elaborated for the sake of it. The information was specific and clearly informed by close familiarity. Coverage tiers, provider networks, how the enrollment process worked, what it covered, and what it didn't. She answered his questions without making him feel like the questions were inconvenient, which they sometimes were. He asked her about the financial eligibility criteria twice, from different angles, until he was sure he understood it, and she let him do that without impatience. There was a moment, somewhere around the 15-minute mark, when her phone rang. She looked at it, rejected the call without comment, and kept talking. He noted this without saying anything. "If Lily were enrolled," he said, "how would it work in practice, like day to day?" "Dr. Reyes would receive a notice that Lily is covered under MedBridge," Victoria said. "Your copays would be handled through the foundation's billing system. For medications, there's a partnership with a pharmacy network. The prescriptions route through a different system, and the out-of-pocket costs drop significantly." "How significantly?" "For most common medications, including antibiotics and respiratory treatments, usually under $10. He was quiet. $10. Instead of 91. He thought about the $21 left in his account, and the week still ahead, and didn't let his face do anything he didn't intend. "Can I ask you something else?" he said. "You can ask me anything," she said, and the simplicity of it was almost disarming. "How did you end up in the wheelchair?" A very brief silence, not a hurt one, more like the silence of someone resetting. "A car accident," she said. 2 years ago." "I'm sorry. Thank you." "Were you—" He stopped. "Never mind. That's not my business." "It was a car accident," she said, and something in her tone had shifted. A fraction flatter, a fraction more careful. "It was a wet road, and someone ran a light. I was in the passenger seat. The driver walked away." She paused. "I didn't walk anywhere for about 8 months." She said it without self-pity and without the careful deflection of someone who'd gotten good at managing other people's discomfort around the subject. She said it the way she seemed to say most things, directly, without decoration. "And you went back to running the company," he said. "I went back to running the company," she confirmed, "sooner than anyone recommended." "Why?" She considered the question. "Because not running it was worse," she said. "Sitting in a rehabilitation facility watching other people make decisions about a company my father built while I had nothing to do but think about the accident and the lawsuit and what I'd lost, that was worse than coming back too soon." She paused. "I made that calculation, and I still think it was the right one, even though it probably set back my physical recovery by 4 months. Was your father okay with that?" "My father had retired 6 months before the accident," she said. "The company was already mine. He supported my coming back." A small pause. He was worried. He's always worried. It's one of his primary functions. There was something almost fond in the way she said it. Not warm exactly, but the tone of someone who knew a person extremely well and had made their peace with their particular shape. He recognized it. He had the same tone when he talked about his uncle. "How's your recovery now?" he said. "If you don't mind me asking." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going to walk again," she said. "The spinal damage was in a section that doesn't regenerate. I've made some functional gains in my core, which affects how I can position myself and manage certain tasks. But the chair is permanent." She said it without the practiced calm of someone delivering a line they've rehearsed. She said it the way she might tell him the weather outside. "That's a hard thing," he said. "It is," she said. Not it was, but it is. Present tense. He appreciated the accuracy. He sat with that for a moment. He realized he'd been in this office for almost half an hour, and whatever he'd expected this meeting to be, a brief exchange, a clear decision, an exit, it had become something else. She was easier to talk to than he'd expected, which was not the same as easy to trust. "I'll think about the program," he said. For Lily. "Take whatever time you need. If I decide yes, what does that actually require from me? Like, is there paperwork, an application?" "There's an intake form," she said. "Diane can walk you through it. It's not complicated." A pause. "There's no commitment on your end. Medbridge isn't a contract." He nodded slowly. He picked up his jacket from the chair back, then he stopped. "Can I ask you something else? One more thing." "Go ahead." "The accident," he said carefully. "The person who ran the light. What happened to them?" A silence. Longer this time. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't easily read, which was different from the expressions he hadn't been able to read before. Those had been controlled, opaque. This one was something she was genuinely working through. "There was a settlement," she said. "Civil case. The insurance companies handled most of it." A pause. He was 23 years old. He had a clean record. He was on his way to work. It was 6 a.m. She stopped. "I don't think about him much. I tried not to. I'm not sure that was the right call either." "You settled without going to court?" "My attorney recommended it. Faster resolution, less exposure, guaranteed outcome." She looked at her hands, which were resting flat on the desk surface. "My father disagreed. He wanted to take it to trial." A long pause. "I still don't know who was right." He stood, jacket in hand. "I'm sorry about the accident," he said. "I know I already said that. I mean it." "I know you do," she said, which was not a reassurance so much as a statement of fact, and it landed that way. He was almost at the door when she spoke again. "Mr. Walker." He turned. "Lily's prescription from yesterday," she said. "The antibiotic and the mucolytic. If you give Diane the receipt on your way out, the foundation can reimburse you. That falls under emergency coverage for families in the intake queue." He looked at her for a long moment. "I haven't filled out an intake form." "I know," she said. "That's why I said intake queue, not enrolled members." He felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, closer to the complicated feeling of having someone see something about your situation that you've been working to keep invisible. "That's $91, he said. "I know. You don't know that." "Doctor, Reyes's office confirmed the prescriptions yesterday when Diane called," she said. "And I know what those medications cost at the CVS on Ashland with your insurance plan." The tightness sharpened. "You looked up my insurance." A pause. "I had it looked up," she said. "Yes." He stood very still. That's a significant overstep, Ms. Hale. I know that. That's not something you just..." He stopped. He was aware of his voice having gotten harder and was working to keep it level. "You don't get to run a background check on my finances because you feel like being helpful." "You're right," she said, and her voice hadn't changed at all. Not defensive, not appeasing, just even. "I overstepped. I'm aware of it." "Then why did you do it?" A beat. "Because I'm better at solving problems than I am at waiting," she said. "And because I had the resources to find out what the problem was, and I used them." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to pretend that was appropriate, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't know what I found." He looked at her across the office in the gray morning light, this woman who had run a check on his insurance plan and memorized the copay at a pharmacy 8 blocks from his apartment and tried to work out what exactly he was dealing with. She was not apologetic in the performing distress sense. She'd said she was wrong with the flatness of someone who meant it, and then she'd explained why she'd done it anyway with the same flatness, and she was sitting there waiting for him to decide what to do about all of it without flinching. It was infuriating, and he couldn't entirely explain why it was also something else. "Keep your reimbursement," he said finally. "All right. I'm going to think about the program, for Lily. Not for me, for her, because she needs consistent coverage, and I can't always guarantee that." "I understand." "But I'm going to need you to not run checks on me," he said. "Whatever I tell you, that's what you know. Nothing else." She met his eyes. "Agreed," she said. "I mean that." He wasn't completely sure he believed it, but he nodded and turned and let himself out of the office, and Diane was in the hallway as if she'd known exactly when the conversation would end, which she probably had. He spent the weekend working. There was always work, if he looked for it. An emergency call came in Saturday morning from a woman in Andersonville whose washing machine had flooded her laundry room overnight, a failed drain pump, 2-hour job. He charged her $200 and felt okay about it. Sunday he did a furnace inspection in Humboldt Park that had been rescheduled twice, and in the afternoon replaced the igniter on a gas range in a townhouse in Wicker Park for a couple who'd been using a camping stove for a week. He kept his hands busy because when his hands were busy, his head ran quieter. He told Lily he might be doing some paperwork over the weekend, which she'd received with the philosophical acceptance of a child who understood that adults did paperwork the way weather happened. Not personally, just inevitably. She'd spent Saturday building an extension onto her cardboard veterinary hospital, and Sunday reading with a focused intensity that reminded him so much of her mother that he had to leave the room once, briefly, to collect himself. Lily's mother, Claire, had died of an aneurysm when Lily was 14 months old. She'd been 28. She'd been a librarian. She'd been in the middle of a sentence when it happened. She'd been on the phone with her mother talking about a book, and the sentence simply stopped. Ethan had been at a job site on the other side of the city. He'd gotten a call from Claire's mother that he'd ignored because he was in the middle of something, and then she'd called back immediately, which was the signal they'd never actually discussed, but both understood meant something was wrong. He didn't think about it constantly. He'd learned over 4 years to carry it in a way that didn't require him to acknowledge it at every moment. It was there the way a scar is there. Always. But not always the first thing you're aware of. But sometimes Lily did something. A posture, a silence, a way she held a book with both hands tight around the spine, and it came forward all at once. He filled out the MedBridge intake form on Sunday night after Lily was in bed. It was, as Victoria had said, not complicated. Basic household information, income, current insurance status, primary care provider. He wrote in Dr. Reyes's name and the clinic address. He hesitated at the income field for a moment. Not because he didn't know the number, but because writing it down and sending it somewhere felt like a different kind of exposure than he was used to. He wrote it down. He submitted the form through the foundation's website. He closed his laptop and went to bed. Monday brought a dense, ordinary cold that had come down from the lake overnight and settled into the city with the particular commitment of early November weather. Ethan had 3 jobs: a residential garbage disposal in Lakeview in the morning, a commercial refrigeration unit at a deli in Pilsen after lunch, and an evening call in Oak Park that turned out to be a dryer with a broken drum support roller, which was a 40-minute fix that he was grateful for by 7:30 when he was tired and still had the drive back. He was pulling out of Oak Park when his phone rang, a Chicago number he didn't recognize. He answered on the second ring. "Walker, Mr. Walker," a woman's voice, professional and measured. "My name is Carla Nguyen. I'm a program coordinator with the Hale Foundation. I'm calling about your MedBridge application." He changed lanes. "Yeah. I wanted to let you know we received your intake form and your daughter's file has been assigned to our pediatric coverage track. Dr. Reyes's office will receive the enrollment notice tomorrow morning." A brief pause. "We also want to let you know the coverage is retroactive to the date of your initial contact with the foundation, which was October 15th. He processed that. Retroactive to the 15th. "Yes, that means the prescriptions from last Thursday would fall within the covered period. If you'd like to submit the receipts, we can process a reimbursement. He had his eyes on the highway. Someone already offered me that reimbursement last Friday, he said. I turned it down. A brief pause. I see. That's entirely your choice, of course. I just want you to know it's still available if you change your mind. I won't, he said, but thank you. Of course. She gave him a number to call if he had questions about the program and told him to expect a welcome packet by email, and then she said goodbye with the efficient warmth of someone who made these calls many times a day and had genuinely decided to be kind each time. He set the phone on the passenger seat and drove. He thought about Victoria Hale sitting in her office at 7 in the morning, running a phone meeting about filing deadlines while simultaneously managing whatever quiet machinery had produced this call. He thought about the word retroactive and what it implied about when the decision had been made. He thought about the fact that she'd made the decision and then sent the form through the ordinary foundation intake process rather than calling him directly. The reimbursement offer she'd made Friday, the one he'd refused, hadn't appeared in this call. It was as if it had been set aside without fanfare. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He wasn't sure what to do with any of this, actually. With the woman in the 19th floor office who ran checks on his insurance and then apologized for it without visible distress, and then quietly arranged the thing she'd offered through a channel that felt, somehow, less like charity than like administration. He took the exit toward Pulaski and drove home through streets that were wet and reflective with the cold. On Wednesday morning, he had no jobs until noon. He'd spent the early part of the morning doing the kind of maintenance work the van regularly required. He'd noticed a slight vibration in the steering at highway speeds, which usually meant a wheel weight had come off somewhere, and he had a jack and the basic equipment to check all 4 tires himself in the alley behind his building, rather than paying $40 at a shop. He found the problem on the front driver's side, a missing weight, drove to the parts shop on Western, got a new set installed, and was back by 10. He was on his second cup of coffee when his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Hale's number. Are you available Thursday morning? VH. He looked at the text for a moment. He typed, For what? A minute passed. Then, I'd like to talk to you about something, not related to the foundation. He typed, What's it related to? Another minute. A job. If you're interested. He sat at his kitchen table in the mid-morning quiet. Lily was at school, the apartment was still, and read the text twice. Then he typed, I'll be there at 8. He put the phone down and finished his coffee. Through the kitchen window, the sky had gone white with the particular flat brightness of a November morning that wasn't committing to anything. Not sunshine, not clouds, just a diffuse and non-committal light that made the city look like a photograph of itself. He watched a pigeon land on the fire escape across the alley, look around with the optimistic vacancy of pigeons everywhere, and leave again. He thought about Thursday. He thought about the fact that he'd now agreed to see Victoria Hale 3 times in 8 days, which was more times than he'd seen most people he'd consider something like a friend. He wasn't sure what that meant. He wasn't sure it meant anything yet. But there was something about her that he kept returning to. Not her resources, not the program, not even the frankness with which she'd acknowledged overstepping. It was something smaller. It was the way she'd said, I believe you on the first day, with no performance in it. The way she'd talked about the accident, the settlement, the 23-year-old who'd run the light, with honesty that didn't seem designed to make him feel anything specific, just to be accurate. He was a man who fixed things for a living. He'd learned to read machines by understanding where they were under stress, where the wear was showing, where the heat was concentrated, which moving part was working harder than it should to compensate for something else that had failed. He didn't know if that understanding transferred to people, but he had the sense, sitting in his kitchen with his coffee gone cold again, that Victoria Hale was working harder than she appeared. And he didn't know yet whether that was his business. He picked up his phone and texted Mrs. Okafor about Thursday morning. She replied with a thumbs up. He rinsed his coffee cup, got his jacket, and went to check on the van steering on the highway, which turned out to be fine. Thursday arrived the way most of November arrived, without ceremony, the sky a flat and non-committal gray that made it hard to tell what time it was from inside. Ethan got Lily ready for school with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been doing the morning routine alone for 4 years. Breakfast, medication. She was on day 5 of the antibiotic, and the cough had already eased to something manageable, a shallow occasional thing rather than the deep productive sound that had worried him last week. Backpack check, coat. The argument about whether she needed a hat that he won, and she conceded with the particular grace of a 6-year-old who has decided to lose this one. Mrs. Okafor arrived at 7:40. He kissed Lily on top of her head, told her to have a good day, and was in the van by 7:50. He thought about the text on the drive over. A job. If you're interested. He turned it over enough times in the past 2 days that the words had started to feel worn smooth, the way a stone does when you carry it in your pocket. He didn't know what kind of job a CEO offered a machine repair technician, and he'd resisted looking it up or thinking too hard about it because he had a tendency, when he overthought things, to talk himself out of them before he'd given them a fair hearing. He parked in the same structure on Wacker. He was 3 minutes early. He went in. Diane was at the reception desk on 19 when he came off the elevator, which was new. Usually she emerged from somewhere deeper in the office. She had his visitor badge ready. Small change, but it registered. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." She handed him the badge. "She's ready for you." "You don't need to knock this time?" Something crossed Diane's face that was almost a smile. "She said to send you straight back." He walked the hallway alone and pushed open the frosted glass doors. Victoria was at the desk, but not working. She was angled toward the window, the river visible below in its November gray-green, and she turned when he came in with the unhurried deliberateness that was simply how she moved. She was wearing a dark red blazer today over a black shirt, and she looked, he thought, like someone who had slept better than usual or worse than usual, and it was impossible to tell which. "Mr. Walker." "Miss Hale." He sat in the same chair. It was already pulled to the right angle. He wasn't sure if Diane did that or if it had just stayed where he'd left it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You mentioned a job." "I did." She didn't go straight to it. She set her hands flat on the desk surface in the way he'd noticed before, so not fidgeting, just a stillness she imposed on herself. "Before I get to that, I want to ask how Lily is doing." "Better," he said. "The antibiotic is working. The foundation's coverage came through. Doctor. Ray has called me Tuesday to confirm the enrollment." "Good." She said it simply, without taking credit for it. "I'm glad." A brief silence. Outside, a tug pushed through the river traffic with dogged patience. He waited. "The job," she said. "I want to be straightforward with you about what it is and where it comes from, because I think if I'm not straightforward, you'll sense that and it'll go badly." She paused. "I'm also going to tell you something that I probably should have told you before now, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you respond." He looked at her steadily. "Okay." She met his eyes. "The wallet wasn't lost," she said. The room didn't change. The river kept moving. He kept his face where it was and said nothing, because nothing came immediately. "I placed it there," she said. "It was a test, deliberate, controlled, and targeted. I had a list of 12 names, people who'd come to my attention through various channels as individuals with financial pressure and proximity to the building. Your name was on the list because you do maintenance work for 2 of our building's management vendors. My security team identified the location and time you'd most likely pass by. The wallet was placed by one of my staff. She kept her voice even through all of it, but not cold. It was the voice of someone delivering something they knew would hurt and had decided the only decent way to do it was accurately. We had 4 wallets placed over 3 weeks. You were the only person who returned it." He sat very still. "The test was designed to find someone whose integrity held under financial stress," she said, "because I need someone for a role in the Foundation's new program that requires handling distributions to vulnerable families. I need someone I can trust completely. After 2 years of running background checks and formal interviews and reference calls, I decided I needed a different kind of data." A pause. "So I created a situation. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones that had come before. It was the silence of something having shifted in the room's weight. The offer to enroll Lily in MedBridge," he said slowly. "Was that part of the test?" "No," she said. "That was genuine." "How do I know that?" "You don't," she said. "Not for certain." "I understand that. The medical coverage is real and has no conditions attached to it. Lily will remain enrolled regardless of what you decide today. That's not a negotiating tool." He looked at her for a long moment, then he stood up. He didn't do it dramatically. He just stood, because sitting still had become impossible, and he walked to the window and looked at the river and tried to sort out what he was feeling, which was several things at once, and not all of them had names yet. The clearest one was anger. Not the hot, immediate kind, but the colder variety, the kind that comes from having thought someone was seeing you as a person and learning they were seeing you as a data point. The one underneath that was something more complicated, because she'd seen him as a data point and the data point had done the human thing, and she was sitting in front of him telling him the truth about it now, which she didn't have to do. She could have hired him for whatever the job was, and he never would have known where it started. He turned around. "You could have not told me," he said. "Yes." "So why did you?" She didn't answer immediately. He watched her work through it, and he had the distinct impression this was not a prepared answer, that she'd known this moment would come and had not scripted it. "Because you told me not to run checks on you," she said finally. "And then I would have been sitting across from you offering you a job built on the foundation of the largest check I've ever run on anyone, and I couldn't—" She stopped. A brief pause. "I couldn't keep doing that." He stood at the window with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at her. "You couldn't keep doing that," he repeated. "No." "Because it's wrong," he said. "Yes." "Or because you thought I'd find out anyway." She held his gaze. "Both," she said, "if I'm being honest." "You should be honest." "I know." He came back to the chair but didn't sit. He stood behind it with his hands on the back of it and looked at her from that standing distance. "What was the job?" he said. "What were you going to offer me?" "A coordinator position with the Foundation's new community outreach program," she said. "Family resource placement, working directly with enrolled families to match them with services, handle distributions, manage the relationship between the Foundation and the partner vendors. It's a salaried position. Benefits. Full-time." He stared at her. "You were going to offer me a job running a social services program." "A community placement program," she said. "It's not clinical. It's logistical and relational. You understand how things break and how to fix them. That's what the job is, but with systems instead of machines. Identifying what's not working for a family and finding the lever that moves it." A pause. "I've read your work history. You troubleshoot. You're good at it. And apparently you're honest about what you find." "You read my work history," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did." "Before or after the wallet?" A silence. "Before," she said. He processed that. "So the 12 people on the list, you didn't find them randomly. You found them by looking first." "That's correct." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Ms. Hale," he said, and his voice had a quality now that he didn't usually let into his professional interactions. Not quite heat, but pressure. "I need you to understand something. I'm not a test subject. I'm not a data point. I'm a man who woke up that Tuesday morning and found something that wasn't mine and made a choice. That choice was private. It happened inside of me, in the rain, in about 12 seconds. And you manufactured the situation that produced it, and then you watched it, and now you want to hire me because it performed correctly." He paused. "Do you understand why that feels like having something taken from you?" She was very still. "Yes," she said. "I do understand that." "Do you actually? Or are you saying that because it's the right thing to say?" "I actually do," she said, and something in her voice had changed. Not softer, but less structured. Less like a board presentation, and more like a person talking. "Because someone did something similar to me once. Not with a wallet, with a relationship. Someone spent 6 months building something with me that turned out to be calculated from the beginning." A pause. "I know what it feels like to find out the ground wasn't what you thought it was." He looked at her. And yet I did it anyway," she said. "I know. I've spent the last 2 days trying to construct an argument for why what I did is categorically different from what was done to me, and I haven't been able to make one that holds." The admission sat in the room between them. He hadn't expected it, and he could tell from the quality of the silence that she hadn't either, or at least hadn't expected to say it in quite that way. He sat down, not because he was done being angry, but because standing over the conversation felt like a performance, and he was tired of performing things. "Who did that to you?" he said. "The person with the relationship." She looked at him with a brief expression that was somewhere between surprised and guarded. "That's a personal question?" "You just told me you manufactured a situation to test my character," he said. "I think I've earned a personal question." The corner of her mouth moved, that almost smile again, the shadow of it. "Fair," she said. She was quiet for a moment. He waited. His name was Daniel Ashworth, she said. He was the CFO of a competitor firm. We were together for almost a year. I found out 8 months in that he'd been reporting to their board on our internal strategy. A pause. Things I'd told him privately, plans we were still developing. He had full access to my life and he was using it professionally. Another pause, shorter. I thought we were building something real. He was building a dossier. Ethan said nothing for a moment. When did you find out? 4 months before the accident, she said. He was gone before the accident, so there were 2 things that year. She said it flatly, without bitterness, and without the absence of bitterness that's its own kind of performance. Just fact, the way bad things accumulate in certain years for no particular reason. And after that, he said, you decided to test people before trusting them. I decided, she said carefully, that trust needed evidence. Yes. Evidence you created. Evidence I created, she confirmed, which I'm aware makes it less like evidence and more like engineering. Yeah, he said. That's the problem. She nodded. She didn't argue with it. He looked at the desk surface between them. There was a small scratch near the corner of it, barely visible, the kind that happened when something was moved without being lifted. He noticed things like that, the wear in objects, the places where use had marked something. He'd always noticed things like that. The other 3 people, he said, the other wallets. What about them? What happened to them? Did they keep the money? She was quiet for a second. 2 kept the cash and left the wallet. 1 tried to use the credit card before returning the wallet to a police station. He absorbed this. And you crossed them off the list. Yes. Did any of them need the money as badly as I did? A pause. I don't know, she said. Probably. But you tested them anyway and crossed them off when they failed a test they didn't know they were taking. She held his gaze. Yes. That bother you? It bothers me more now than it did when I designed the test, she said, and the honesty of that, the acknowledgement that his presence had changed how she saw it, was the first thing she'd said that felt fully unguarded. He leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling, which was clean and high, and had a small light fixture in the far corner that was positioned slightly off-center, which he found for some reason reassuring. Nothing in this room was actually perfect. The job, he said. Tell me the actual salary. A beat. 62,000 to start, she said, with a performance review at 6 months. The position maxes out at 82 over 3 years. He kept his eyes on the ceiling. 62,000 was more than he'd made in any single year of his life. It was more than double what he'd made last year. He didn't let himself feel that fully yet because feeling it would compromise his ability to think clearly about it, and he needed to think clearly. Benefits, he said. Full medical, dental, vision, pension contributions starting at year 1. 4 weeks PTO. Reporting to you? To the foundation director, Marcus Webb. I'm on the foundation board, but I'm not in the day-to-day chain. Why not? Because the foundation operates independently of the company, she said, by design. It keeps the mission clean. He brought his gaze back down from the ceiling and looked at her. And what happens to our... whatever this is, he said. If I take the job, what happens to this? She looked at him without blinking. What do you mean by this? These conversations, he said. Whatever it is we've been doing for the past week and a half. You watching me trying to figure out what you want. If I'm working for your foundation, what is this? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she said, and it sounded like the truest thing she'd said in the meeting. That's honest. I'm trying to be. You weren't before. No, she said. I wasn't. He looked at her. She looked back. Outside the windows, the river was doing what the river did, moving constantly, going somewhere, indifferent to what was being decided in the offices above it. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. The job and the other thing, I need to think about both. She nodded. Take whatever time you need. A week, he said. I'll have an answer in a week. All right? He stood. He picked up his jacket from the chair back and held it in his hands for a moment. The person who placed the wallet, he said. The staff member. Yes? Did they watch? Were they watching when I picked it up? A pause. Yes, she said. There was a camera. He nodded slowly. He'd wondered. He wasn't sure why it mattered, but it did. The image of himself standing in the rain, making what he'd thought was a private choice, being observed from somewhere he couldn't see. It had the particular sting of a thing you can't undo. I want to say something, he said, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. She waited. I'm not angry about the test because I failed to pass it, he said. I didn't fail. I made the choice I would have made regardless of who was watching, and that's not something you can take from me. He paused. What I'm angry about is that you took a moment that was mine, a private moral decision that had nothing to do with you, and you claimed it. You used it, and now I'm sitting here trying to figure out whether a job offer is genuine or whether it's the next part of the experiment. He stopped. That's what I mean about taking something. She didn't speak immediately. When she did, her voice was careful in a different way than it had been before. Not controlled, but careful the way someone is careful when they're working not to break something. You're right, she said. I claimed something that wasn't mine to claim, and I'm not sure I can give it back, which is… She stopped. That's something I need to sit with. Yeah, he said. You do. He pulled his jacket on. He buttoned one button, then undecided, then left it. He moved toward the door and then stopped with his hand not quite on the handle. The scratch on your desk, he said. Near the left corner, she blinked. What about it? How long has it been there? A pause, confused. Then something shifted in her expression towards something almost unguarded. Not quite surprised, but its cousin. About 6 months, she said. Someone moved a sculpture without lifting it. You kept it. The desk is good oak, she said. I wasn't going to replace the desk. Most people would have. Most people replace things too fast, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said. They do. He left. He sat in the van for 20 minutes this time. He didn't drink coffee. He didn't look at his phone. He sat in the driver's seat with both hands in his lap and looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure and let his mind run through what had just happened with the same methodical patience he gave to a machine he didn't understand yet. There was the anger, which was real, and he wasn't going to minimize it. She had engineered a situation to extract data about him. She had done this with a coldness that was, in its way, more unsettling than cruelty. It was the coldness of someone who had replaced trust with systems because trust had burned her, and who didn't quite see, until he'd named it, that in doing so she'd become the thing that had hurt her. There was the job, which was real in a different way. $62,000 in benefits and work that wasn't sliding under machines and parking structures in November. He tried not to let that do too much work in his thinking, because money wasn't a reason to take a job, it was a fact about a job, and those were different things. There was Victoria Hale herself, who kept confounding his attempts to file her neatly. She'd acknowledged every overreach he'd named. She'd admitted things she didn't need to admit. She told him about Daniel Ashworth and the accident and the settlement with a directness that didn't feel like performance, and he wasn't sure what to do with any of it because it didn't fit the shape of a person who was only using him. And there was the scratch on the desk. He knew it was a small thing. He knew that in the accounting of the conversation, it didn't weigh against the wallet camera or the insurance check or the 12 names on a list. But he thought about someone. Victoria Hale, probably, because he had the sense that she was someone who noticed things precisely, seeing the scratch when it was new and deciding the desk was worth keeping anyway. And he thought about what it meant to be someone who didn't replace things too fast. He started the van. He had a job at noon in Logan Square. The same building as last month, different unit, different problem. Terrence had texted him Tuesday about a refrigerator making a sound he'd described as bad. Ethan had enough experience with Terrence's descriptions to know that bad could mean anything from a loose drain pan to a compressor on its last legs, and he'd bring parts for both. He pulled out of the parking structure and into Wacker Drive traffic and drove north. He didn't tell anyone what had happened. There wasn't really anyone to tell. His uncle Roy was in Milwaukee, and they talked maybe once a month. A comfortable, uncomplicated relationship built mostly on sports updates and the occasional question about a job Ethan couldn't figure out on his own. His friends from before. The people who'd existed in the couple years when he and Claire had a social life, who'd come to the funeral and called for a few months after, had drifted with the particular inevitability of loss, not through cruelty, but through the natural attrition of lives that didn't share the same daily weight. He'd never had the bandwidth to rebuild that. There was Mrs. Okafor, who sometimes asked him how things were going with the particular alert directness of someone who understood loneliness by acquaintance, but he wasn't going to sit down with his 63-year-old neighbor and work through his feelings about a CEO who'd put a fake wallet on a sidewalk. So he turned it over privately, the way he turned over most things. He fixed the refrigerator in Terrence's building. Compressor relay, not the compressor itself, which was a lucky break for the tenant and a moderately profitable 2 hours for Ethan. He picked Lily up from school and they stopped at the park, even though it was cold, because she'd asked and because he had nowhere to be, and because watching her navigate the climbing structure with the focused determination she brought to everything physical was one of the few things that reliably cleared his head. She sat next to him on the bench afterward, cheeks red from the cold, and leaned against his arm. "Dad." "Yeah." If someone did something wrong to you but then said sorry, does that make it okay? He looked at her sideways. She was staring at the middle distance with the expression she got when a question had been building for a while. "Did something happen at school?" "Maya took my eraser and said she didn't, but I saw her. Then at lunch she said sorry." "Did she give it back?" "No, she lost it." He thought about that. "Did she mean the sorry?" Lily considered this seriously. "I think so." She looked sad when she said it. "Then I think the sorry makes it better," he said. "Not the same as if it never happened, but better." She was quiet for a moment. "What if she does it again?" "Then the sorry means less," he said. She nodded slowly, digesting this. "Okay," she said, and stood up from the bench with the abrupt decisiveness of a child who has processed something and is ready to move on. "Can we get hot chocolate?" "Where?" "The place with the marshmallows." "We have marshmallows at home." "It's not the same." He stood up, put his hands in his pockets. "No," he agreed. "It's not the same." They walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks from the park, and Lily got hot chocolate with marshmallows, and Ethan got a coffee he didn't need but wanted, and they sat at a small table by the window and watched the street outside, while Lily told him about the veterinary hospital she was planning to extend into a second building, because the cats and the dogs were having territorial disputes. "You need a neutral zone," he said, "like a waiting room that's not affiliated with either side." "That's a good idea," she said, and pulled a napkin across the table and started drawing a floor plan. He watched her draw and thought about what she'd asked on the bench. Whether a sorry makes it okay. He didn't know yet. He thought it might depend on what came after the sorry, and whether the person who'd said it understood not just that they'd done something wrong, but what exactly the wrong thing was. And he thought about Victoria Hale saying, "I have spent the last 2 days trying to construct an argument for why what I did is categorically different from what was done to me, and I haven't been able to make one that holds." That was a particular kind of sorry, the kind that came from actually looking at something. He still didn't know what he was going to do. But he thought, sitting in the coffee shop with his daughter drawing floor plans on a napkin, that whatever he decided, he wanted it to be a decision he was making, not a reaction to being manipulated, and not an overcorrection away from something that had its own real weight. He had a week. He'd use it. Lily finished the floor plan, held it up for his assessment, and declared the neutral zone waiting room the best part of the whole design. "It's got good bones," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means the structure is sound," he said. "Whatever you build on top of it will hold." She seemed to find this satisfying. She folded the napkin carefully and put it in her coat pocket to take home. And then she drank the last of her hot chocolate, and they walked home in the early dark of November with the cold pressing in from the lake and their breath visible in the air. And he held her hand and she didn't pull away, which she was starting to do sometimes now. The first small assertion of independence, but not today. He was grateful for that. The week he'd asked for passed the way weeks do when you're waiting on something. Unevenly. Some days moving fast, and some days with the stubborn drag of a machine running on insufficient power. He worked. He had enough jobs through the middle of November to keep his hands occupied and his mind from circling too tightly on the question he'd given himself 7 days to answer. A broken furnace in Bridgeport on Friday morning. A commercial ice machine at a bar in Wrigleyville on Saturday that had stopped producing and turned out to have a frozen water line. Obvious fix, 2 hours, decent money. Monday brought a washing machine and a laundromat in Little Village that had been vibrating so badly it walked itself 3 feet from the wall during a cycle, which was a leveling issue compounded by a failing drum bearing, which was a longer job. He liked the longer jobs. They required enough attention that there wasn't room for much else. Lily's cough was gone by the end of that first week. She finished her antibiotic course on Tuesday, and Dr. Reyes's office called Wednesday to confirm a follow-up was scheduled for December. The call came from the Foundation's MedBridge coordinator rather than directly from the clinic, which was a small thing but meant the system was working the way it was supposed to, efficiently, without him having to manage it. He noted that without letting himself feel too much about it. He thought about Victoria Hale at odd moments. Not constantly, but the way you think about an unresolved problem. It surfaced when his hands were busy and his conscious mind wasn't directing traffic. He'd be 60 feet of wire into a diagnostic on a commercial refrigeration unit, and suddenly he'd be back in the 19th floor office, watching her say, "I have spent the last 2 days trying to construct an argument for why what I did is categorically different from what was done to me, and I haven't been able to make one that holds." The particular quality of that admission, the absence of self-protection in it, he couldn't decide if she was someone who had genuinely changed inside a conversation or someone who was very good at reading what a conversation required and producing it. He didn't think she was performing, but he also knew that people who were very good at certain things didn't always know they were doing them. On Thursday, exactly 1 week from their last meeting, he texted, "I have an answer. Are you available?" The reply came in 4 minutes. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Unless you'd prefer somewhere other than the office." He read that twice. "Unless you'd prefer somewhere other than the office." It was a small thing, the offering of an alternative, but it was the kind of small thing that accumulated into meaning if you paid attention. He typed, "The office is fine." Out. He arrived at 7:55. Diane had his badge ready. He rode the elevator alone this time. Victoria was at her desk but not working. She had coffee in front of her and nothing open on the monitors, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. She looked, for the first time since he'd met her, like someone who was waiting rather than managing. "Mr. Walker." "Miss Hale." He sat. He didn't put his jacket on the chair back this time, kept it on, which he wasn't sure was deliberate until he'd done it. "I've thought about the job." "I know," she said. "Tell me." "I'm going to say no," he said. "For now." A pause. She didn't react visibly, but something in the quality of her stillness shifted. "For now," she repeated. "The job is real, and I can see the value in it," he said. "And $62,000 is not something I can pretend doesn't matter to me. But I can't take a position at your foundation right now, not because I'm still angry about the wallet. I've worked through most of that. But because if I walk into that building as an employee 4 weeks after all of this, I'm not going to be able to trust my own judgment about anything, about the work, about you, about whether I'm making decisions or just responding to a situation someone else constructed." He paused. "I need some distance from the test before I can be useful to anyone." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a clear reason," she said. "I know it means you need to find someone else." "It might," she said, "or it might mean the position stays open for a while." He met her eyes. "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "Don't keep it open on my account," he said. "If you need someone, hire someone. This isn't a negotiation." "I understand," she said, and she sounded like she did. A brief pause. "Can I ask what you decided about the other thing?" He'd known she'd ask. "What other thing do you mean, specifically?" "You said you needed to think about the job and the other thing," she said. "The conversations, whatever this is." He looked at her. She held the eye contact with the quality she always did. Not aggressive, not deflecting, just present. He'd come to understand that steadiness wasn't the same as composure. It was something she'd worked at. "I don't know yet," he said. "Honestly, I don't know what this is or what it should be." He paused. "But I don't think I want it to stop." Something changed in her face. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic person, but perceptibly. A fraction of something released. "Okay," she said. "That's all I've got right now," he said. "That's enough," she said. A silence that was different from the previous silences. Less weighted, more like space. Outside the windows, the river was catching what little light the November sky was offering, turning it a dull silver. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can." "The job you're offering, the foundation work. Did Marcus Webb know it was coming from a controlled situation? Does he know how you found me?" A pause. "No," she said. He knows I identified you as a candidate. He doesn't know the specifics of how. You should tell him, Ethan said. She looked at him. That would complicate things. Yeah, he said. It would. You should tell him anyway. She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was actually thinking rather than managing. You're right, she said finally. I'll tell him. Okay. He stood. I'll call you, he said. Not about the job, just, I'll call. I'd like that, she said, and it sounded like a thing she'd decided to say rather than a thing that had simply come out, which meant she'd weighed it, which meant she meant it. He left. 3 days after that meeting, on a Sunday afternoon when Lily was at a birthday party for a girl in her class, and the apartment was quiet. In the particular way it was only when she was out of it, Ethan's phone rang with Victoria Hale's number. He picked up on the third ring. Hello? Hi. A brief pause. Is this a bad time? No, he said. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a repair manual for a model of commercial dishwasher he'd agreed to service next week that he'd never worked on before. What's going on? Nothing specific, she said. A pause that was unusual for her, slightly unsteady. I talked to Marcus. About? About how I found you, the wallet, the whole thing. He set the manual down. How did that go? Not well, initially. A brief exhale. He was angry. He said it was ethically compromised and that if it ever came out publicly, it could damage the Foundation's credibility. Another pause. He's right. I told him he was right. Is he going to do anything about it? He wants a formal review of the process, she said. He wants documentation of what happened and a written assurance that it won't happen again. A pause. He also said the position is off the table until the review is complete, which means if you'd taken it Friday, we'd be having a different, worse conversation right now. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about the review? I think it's appropriate, she said. I don't love it, but I think it's appropriate. Good, he said. That's the right answer. A silence on the line, not uncomfortable, more like two people existing in the same space without needing to fill it. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Sure. Your daughter's mother. A careful pause. You've never mentioned her. I don't know if that means she's not in the picture or if it means it's not something you talk about. He looked at his coffee. She died, he said, 4 years ago. Aneurysm. I'm sorry, she said. I'm very sorry. Thank you. How old was Lily? 14 months. A quiet moment on the line. I can't imagine, she said, and she said it the way she said things that she actually meant, without comfort performance, just the plain shape of it. It was a bad year, he said. After that, I had Lily and the business I was trying to keep running, and I was 28 years old, and I didn't know how to do any of it. He paused. You figure it out. You don't figure it out gracefully, but you figure it out. You seem like someone who figured it out, she said. I seem that way, he said. There's still a lot of days where I'm not sure. That's probably true of everyone, she said. The ones who say they've figured it out are usually the ones who stopped looking. He thought about that. What does your father think about all this? He asked. The review, the Foundation situation. I haven't told him, she said. Why not? A pause. Because he'll worry, and then he'll try to fix it. And his way of fixing things involves calling lawyers and controlling outcomes, which is where I come from, and which is also exactly what got me into this. She stopped. I need to handle this without someone else's system. That's self-aware, he said. I have good days, she said, and it was dry enough that he almost laughed. Your father, he said. Are you close? Complicated close, she said. He built the company. He handed it to me when he retired and then spent the next 8 months second-guessing every decision I made through the back channel of the board. A brief pause. After the accident, that changed. He stopped second-guessing and started just hovering, which is different and in some ways harder. He's scared, Ethan said. Yes. That's what fear looks like when it doesn't know what else to do. It hovers. A silence. You sound like you know that particular configuration, she said. I'm a single dad, he said. I invented hovering. She laughed. It was a short laugh, a little surprised, and it sounded like something she hadn't done in a while. Not in the sense of sadness, but in the sense of something being reached that didn't get reached often. Fair, she said. They talked for another 40 minutes. He wasn't tracking the time until it was over, and he looked at the clock and noted it with something between surprise and not surprise. They talked about the foundation and what Marcus's review would actually examine, and about the MedBridge program and a gap she'd identified in the rural outreach component, and then somehow about the restaurant in River North where he'd fixed the dishwasher, and she knew the owner, had been there twice, and said the food was excellent, but the room was too loud. I haven't been to a restaurant since the accident, she said, which came out in the middle of a sentence about noise levels and then hung there with the particular weight of something said without planning to say it. Why not? He said. A pause. The access is variable, she said. Some places are fine, some aren't. And before the accident, I went wherever I wanted without thinking about it. And now every time I want to go somewhere, I have to think about it first. And sometimes the effort of the thinking is more than the thing is worth. She paused. That sounds more self-pitying than I mean it. It doesn't, actually, he said. It sounds accurate. It is accurate, she said. I'm not asking for sympathy. That's what it is. Have you been to Monteverde? He said. A surprised pause. The Italian place on Monroe? Yeah. Once, she said, before the accident. It was very good. They renovated about 18 months ago, he said. I did some work there during the build-out. They were having issues with the commercial kitchen ventilation. The owner, woman named Sandra, she's in a wheelchair, has been for 20 years. She designed the whole renovation around access. He paused. Every table is reachable. The bathrooms are genuinely accessible, not technically compliant accessible. The floor is level throughout. A pause. I don't know if that matters to you. A silence on the line. How do you know all that? She said. Sandra told me, he said. She was very particular about it. She said she was tired of restaurants that were technically accessible in the way that technically means there's a ramp, but practically means you're eating in a corner near the kitchen. He paused. She seemed like someone who'd thought about it for a long time. Another silence. That matters, Victoria said. Yes, that matters a lot. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. And then neither of them said anything for a moment. And then she said, Thank you, Ethan. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noted it the way he noted the things that were off-center in a room, without making a thing of it, just registering that it had shifted. You're welcome, he said. They said goodbye, and he set his phone on the table and looked at the repair manual he'd stopped reading. He picked it up again and found his place, and read for another 20 minutes before Lily came home from the birthday party with a party favor bag and a detailed report on the cake, which had been chocolate with raspberry filling and which she described as the best cake she'd ever had in her entire life, which she said with the total conviction of someone who has not yet learned to hedge superlatives. Better than the one we made for your birthday? He said. She considered this seriously. Different best, she decided. He accepted this as reasonable and made her dinner. They found a rhythm over the next few weeks that neither of them named or formally established, because naming it would have required deciding what it was, and neither of them was ready to do that yet. He called on Tuesday evenings, usually around 8, after Lily was in bed. Sometimes she called first. The conversations ran between 30 minutes and an hour and a half, and they covered a range of things that surprised him by their variety. The foundation review, which was moving slowly and generating more paperwork than either Marcus or Victoria had anticipated. The MedBridge program's winter enrollment push, which was exceeding projections. A family he'd heard about through Mrs. Okafor, who was having trouble accessing services, and who he mentioned without really thinking about it, and which Victoria had quietly routed through the Foundation's intake system within 2 days without saying she'd done it until he noticed the follow-up call mentioned to Mrs. Okafor. You did that without telling me, he said, the next Tuesday. I did, she said. You're doing the thing again where you fix the problem without asking if you should. A pause. I know, she said. I'm working on it. But the family needed services and they were eligible, and the intake process would have taken 3 weeks they didn't have. So you expedited it? Yes. Did you run any background checks? A longer pause. No, she said. Just the standard eligibility confirmation. Okay, he said. Are you angry? He thought about it honestly. A little, he said, but less than I would have been a month ago. Progress, she said dryly. Don't push it, he said, and she laughed again. Less surprised this time, more like something she was getting used to having access to. He went to Monteverde on a Saturday in late November. He hadn't planned to mention it, but she asked how his weekend had been, and he told her he'd gone with Lily, which was true. Lily had declared the gnocchi the second best food of her life, after the birthday cake, but ahead of Mrs. Okafor's jollof rice, which she ranked third with the diplomacy of a child trying not to hurt anyone's feelings. Was the access actually as good as you said? Victoria asked. Better, he said. I noticed it more because I was looking for it. Sandra was there. I introduced myself, reminded her I'd done work during the renovation. She remembered. A brief quiet. I'd like to go, Victoria said. Yeah, he said. Yes, she said. If, I'd like to go sometime. He understood what she was saying and what she wasn't saying. I'll make a reservation, he said. You don't have to. I'll make a reservation, he said again, not unkindly but firmly, and she let him. They went the first Saturday in December. He'd picked her up in the van, which he'd been mildly anxious about. Not the van itself, but the logistics of it, the ramp. Whether the conversation would become about whether this was a date or a professional relationship or something with no existing name. Whether the casual configuration of two people in a van would feel wrong after the formality of all those office meetings. But Victoria had come out of her building's accessible entrance with Diane, who got her settled in the passenger seat with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it many times, and then Diane had said, "Have a good evening," and left. And Victoria had pulled her seatbelt across and looked at the van's interior with the expression of someone taking honest stock of an environment. "This is a working vehicle," she said. "It is," he said. She looked at the laminated Lily drawing clipped to the key fob. She didn't comment on it. She looked out the windshield. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." Sandra had reserved them a table near the window, not the corner near the kitchen, the actual window. And when they arrived, she came out herself to say hello, which he hadn't expected and which Victoria seemed to take in without showing what she made of it. Sandra was direct and warm without being performatively welcoming, and she and Victoria exchanged precisely 4 sentences before the conversation shifted naturally to the food, which was where Sandra's real attention lived. "The gnocchi," Ethan told Victoria. "Lily's second best food." "Second," Sandra said. "Behind a birthday cake at a 6-year-old's party," he said. "Stiff competition." Sandra seemed to find this entirely reasonable and left them to their menus. Victoria ordered the hand-rolled pasta, which Sandra brought herself, and described with the brevity of someone who cooked rather than performed. Ethan ordered the branzino, which he hadn't had before, and which was better than he'd expected. They ate without rushing, which was also different. In the office, everything had a pace, an economy of time. Here, the time was different. Neither of them was managing anything. "This is strange," Victoria said, at some point in the middle of the meal, looking at her plate. "What is?" "This," she said. She gestured slightly, not at the restaurant specifically, more at the general configuration of the evening. "I don't do this." "Eat dinner?" "Go somewhere," she said, "with someone, without an agenda." She paused. "I haven't done this since before Daniel, since before the accident." She looked up. "That's 2 years of not doing this." He held her gaze. "How is it?" She looked at the window, at the street outside with its December cold and its Christmas lights in the shop windows. "Harder than I expected," she said. "And better." "That tracks," he said. She looked back at him. "Does it bother you?" "The chair." "In a social context." He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than the reassuring deflection it invited. "It changes some things," he said. "Not because of the chair itself, but because of what I have to pay attention to. Whether a space is accessible, whether the table height works, whether you can maneuver without having to ask anyone for help. I notice those things now in a way I didn't before." He paused. "That's not the same as it bothering me." She was quiet for a moment. Most people either ignore it completely, like they're performing the idea that it's not there, or they're so aware of it that it becomes the whole conversation, she said. "You just answer the question." "You asked the question directly," he said. "It seemed like you deserved the same." She looked at him with the quality of attention she'd had since the first day in the office, but different now. The wariness that had lived underneath it before was less present. "I'm not easy to be around," she said. "I know," he said. "I control things. I research things I shouldn't research. I make decisions about other people's situations without asking first." "You're working on it," he said. "I am," she said. "Slowly." "I'm not particularly easy either," he said. "I take too long to ask for help. I keep everything private until it becomes a problem. I don't let people close enough to know when I'm struggling." "I noticed," she said. "I know you did," he said. They ate in a comfortable silence for a moment, which was new. The silences before had always carried something, some weight of what was unresolved. This one was lighter. "Tell me something about Claire," Victoria said. He looked up from his plate. She met his eyes steadily, without apology for the question. He thought for a moment. "She had a theory about books," he said. "She said you could tell everything about a person by which books they kept after they'd read them. The ones that go to the donation pile, those are the books you finished out of obligation or entertainment. The ones that stay on the shelf are the ones that changed something." He paused. "She had 3 shelves of books she kept. I still have them. I haven't touched them, but I haven't gotten rid of them either." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "What did she keep?" He thought. "A lot of history, narrative nonfiction, some poetry, which surprised me when I first saw it because she didn't seem like someone who read poetry until I read some of it and understood that she read poetry the way she did everything else, like it was useful, like it was information." A pause. "One book in Spanish, which she'd studied in college. She hadn't spoken it in 10 years, but she said she kept the book because she wasn't ready to decide she was done with it." Victoria looked at him. "She sounds like someone who held on to things." "She was," he said. "Good things and hard things both. She didn't let either of them go easy." He paused. "Lily's like that. She keeps everything." "Like the napkin floor plan," Victoria said. He looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "You mentioned it," she said, 3 weeks ago. You said she designed a neutral zone waiting room for her cardboard animal hospital and kept the napkin." He had mentioned it. He'd forgotten he had. He looked at her and thought about the fact that she had stored that detail, a napkin, a 6-year-old's floor plan, in the same careful attention she gave to earnings reports and board reviews. "You listen well," he said. "It's the one thing I've always been good at," she said without pride, just honestly. "Understanding what someone's saying before they've finished saying it. It used to scare people." "Does it still?" "Sometimes," she said. "Does it scare you?" He thought about the key fob, the ID photo, the insurance plan, about the wall camera watching him in the rain. "A little," he said, "but not in the way it used to." She nodded. She looked at her wine glass, turned it slightly in her hand. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." "The medical coverage, Lily's enrollment, that was real from the first day. I need you to know I haven't used it as leverage or tracking. I've deliberately stayed out of her file since the initial setup." She looked up. "I wanted to say that clearly and not in passing." "I believe you," he said. "Just like that?" "Just like that," he said, and he meant it, which was different from meaning it a month ago, when he'd said the same words and meant something more tentative. She held his gaze. Something moved in her expression, something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite relief, but was somewhere between the two. And it sat there for a moment before she let it settle back into the steadiness she kept around herself like a habit she couldn't quit. The dinner wound down slowly and easily, the way good dinners do when neither person is watching the clock. Sandra came by once more, and they talked briefly about the renovation, about what she'd had to fight for with the architect, about the particular indignity of accessible in name-only spaces that Victoria described with the precision of someone who'd navigated them for 2 years. "I had a contractor tell me once that a 6-inch lip at a doorway was technically within code," Victoria said. Sandra looked at her flatly. 6-inch lip," she said. "I sent someone back with a grinder the following week," Victoria said. Sandra smiled, real and wide. "Good," she said, and went back to her kitchen. On the drive back, they were quiet for a while. Chicago moved past the windows, lit up in its December way. The bridges strung with lights, the river black and reflective below, the city doing what it always did, regardless of what any particular person within it was navigating. Thank you for this, Victoria said. She was looking at the passenger window, the city sliding past. It was dinner, he said. I know what it was, she said. Thank you anyway. He drove her back to her building. Diane was not there. Victoria had texted her not to come. He'd heard her do it at the restaurant, and he'd noticed but not said anything. He came around to the passenger side and helped with the wheelchair in the way he'd seen Diane do it, but doing it himself for the first time, which required 2 adjustments and a moment of working out the right angle. And Victoria did not pretend it was seamless, and he did not pretend he had it figured out immediately, and eventually it was done, and she was in the chair and they were on the sidewalk in the December cold. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She moved toward the entrance and then stopped and looked back at him over her shoulder. The job, she said. The review will be done in January. Marcus is going to want to reopen the position. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to decide tonight, she said. I wanted you to know it's coming. I know, he said again. I'm thinking about it. She nodded once, turned, went inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold. Above him, the city's lights pressed against the low clouds, turning the sky a particular shade of orange-gray that he'd always associated with Chicago winters. Not beautiful, exactly, but specific to this place and this time of year in a way that felt, after years of it, like something close to home. He got back in the van. He drove home through empty streets, past his neighborhoods, and their particular late-night quiet, and he thought about what was coming in January and what he was going to do about it. And he thought about Victoria on the sidewalk looking back at him, and he thought about Claire's bookshelves still in the second bedroom, and about Lily's napkin floor plan in her coat pocket. He thought about things that were worth keeping. He pulled into the alley behind his building and cut the engine and sat for a minute in the silence. He didn't have it figured out, but he thought, for the first time in a long time, that not having it figured out was something he could hold without it pulling him under. That was enough for tonight. January came in hard. Chicago did this sometimes. December would be almost gentle, cold but manageable, the kind of cold that reminded you it could be worse, and then January would arrive and show you exactly how much worse it could be. The temperature dropped 17 degrees in 2 days, the lake wind picked up its particular meanness, and the city compressed itself inward the way cities do in serious cold, people moving faster between buildings, the streets emptier by 8 in the evening, everyone conserving something. Ethan had more work than usual in January. Cold weather broke machines. Furnaces that had been limping through fall finally gave out. Pipes froze in buildings with inadequate insulation. He'd taken 3 emergency calls in the first week alone, 2 furnaces and a burst pipe in a 3-flattened Pilsen, whose owner had been patching the insulation problem for 2 winters and finally ran out of patch. He worked long days and came home to Lily, already asleep more often than he liked, and he'd sit on the edge of her bed for a few minutes in the dark the way he had when she was small, just confirming the particular reassurance of a sleeping child's breathing. The Foundation's review concluded on January 9th. Marcus Webb called Ethan directly, which surprised him. He'd expected Victoria to be the one to reach out. Marcus was a man in his late 40s whose voice on the phone had the particular texture of someone who'd spent many years in nonprofit administration, careful, measured, with the quiet authority of someone who understood institutional risk. He introduced himself, said he was the Foundation director, and then said, I expect Victoria has told you about the review. She has, Ethan said. Then I'll be direct, Marcus said. The review found that the method used to identify you as a candidate was inappropriate. Victoria has acknowledged this in writing, and the methodology has been formally prohibited going forward. I want you to know that as someone who was directly involved. I appreciate that, Ethan said. I also want you to know, Marcus said, that the job offer still stands, on its own merits, separate from how it originated. I've reviewed your background independently, your work history, how you operate, the references I could find, and I've had 3 conversations with Victoria about you over the past 6 weeks. A pause. She's honest about her mistakes, Mr. Walker. In my experience, that's rarer than the job qualifications. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He was in the van, parked outside a building in Rogers Park, where he'd just finished a furnace call. The heat was running full blast, and outside the windows, the January cold pressed against the glass. When do you need an answer? He said. Take a week, Marcus said. The position starts February 1st if you want it. He said he'd be in touch and ended the call and sat in the parked van for a while. He'd known this was coming. He'd had since December to work toward a decision, and he thought he knew what it was. But knowing what you're going to do and being ready to do it were two different conditions, and he'd learned in 32 years of making decisions under pressure to respect that gap rather than rush across it. He called Victoria that evening. "Marcus called me today," he said. "I know," she said. "He told me he was going to." "Did you ask him to call?" "No," she said. "He decided to on his own. I think he wanted you to hear the review outcome from someone other than me." "That was thoughtful," Ethan said. "Marcus is thoughtful," she said. "It's one of the reasons the foundation works." A brief silence. "I'm going to take the job," he said. A pause on her end. The particular pause of someone who has been waiting to hear something and, now that they're hearing it, isn't quite sure what to do with the relief. "Okay," she said. "But I need to say something first," he said. "And I need you to actually hear it, not just receive it and file it." "Go ahead," she said, and her voice was careful in the way it got when she was paying full attention. "If I come to work at the foundation," he said, "I'm not coming as someone who owes you anything. Not for Medbridge, not for Lily's coverage, not for the dinners or the conversations. We start clean. That means when I disagree with a decision, yours, Marcus's, anyone's, I say it directly, and that doesn't change because of our personal dynamic." "I wouldn't want it to," she said. "I know you say that," he said. "I need it to also be true when I'm actually disagreeing with you about something you care about. That's different from saying it in the abstract." A pause. "You're right," she said. "That is different." A longer pause. "I can't promise I'll handle it gracefully every time. I'm not built for graceful, but I can promise I'll handle it honestly." "That's what I'm asking for," he said. "Then, yes," she said. "That's what you'll get." He looked out the windshield at the street, at the yellow circles of the streetlights in the cold. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "The other thing," he said. "Whatever we are outside of the foundation, I can't be your employee and have it be unclear. It has to be one or the other, or it has to be something we've actually talked about and decided." A very long pause. Longer than most of her pauses, which were already longer than most people's. "I know," she said finally. "So which is it?" "I don't know how to answer that without making it sound more certain than it is," she said. "I haven't been. I haven't let anyone close in 2 years. I'm not good at it anymore. Maybe I never was." A pause. "But I don't want to be your employer and nothing else. That's the honest answer." "Okay," he said. "Is that enough?" she said. And there was something in the question that was genuinely uncertain. Not strategic, just human. "Yeah," he said. "For now, that's enough." "For now," she repeated, and he could hear that she understood what he meant by it. Not a hedge, but an honest marking of where they were. A beginning that acknowledged itself as a beginning. "I'll call Marcus tomorrow," he said. "Okay," she said. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Ethan." He started at the foundation on February 3rd, which was a Monday, which felt appropriate. Beginnings should be Mondays, he thought, because Mondays made no promises about being easy and therefore had integrity. Marcus ran the onboarding himself. The office was on the 12th floor of a different building 3 blocks from Hale Technologies, deliberately separate, as Victoria had said, by design. It was a quieter space than the 19th floor, less architectural statement and more functional institution, good lighting, crowded whiteboards, the kind of organized-looking chaos that meant people were actually working rather than performing the idea of it. There were 11 full-time staff and a rotating cast of contractors and partner liaisons. The Medbridge team alone had 4 people. The family placement program, Ethan's domain, was him and, pending budget approval, 1 coordinator hire he'd have input on. Marcus walked him through everything without condescension and without the opposite problem, which was dumping everything at once and leaving someone to sort it out. He was a precise explainer. He cared about the work in the visible, unglamorous way of someone who'd been doing it long enough to know that caring quietly was more durable than caring loudly. On the second day, Marcus closed his office door and said, "I need you to know that my reservations about how you came to us were about the process, not about you personally." "I know," Ethan said. "Victoria made a mistake," Marcus said. "She knows it, but she also, in 20 years of working adjacent to people with her kind of resources, I've rarely seen someone hold themselves as accountable as she did through that review. She didn't minimize it. She didn't lawyer it. He paused. I'm not telling you this to lobby for her. I'm telling you because you should have an accurate picture of who you're working with. I appreciate it, Ethan said. Good, Marcus said, and opened his door again, and that was the end of that conversation, which was exactly the right length. The work was harder than Ethan had expected and more interesting than he'd feared. He'd worried, privately, that he'd be lost without the physical, mechanical dimension of his repair work, that working with systems and people rather than machines would feel abstract in a way that drained him. But what he found was that the diagnostic logic was the same. A family presenting to the Foundation's intake process had a problem, sometimes one clear problem, more often a tangle of interconnected ones where fixing the most visible one without addressing the underlying system would only produce the same failure again downstream. He understood that logic. He'd been living it personally for years. He was good at listening to people describe their situations without projecting what he thought the problem was before he'd heard them out. He was good at identifying the thing that actually needed moving versus the things that were symptoms of it. He was not good, initially, at the administrative dimension, the reporting requirements, the database systems, the particular vocabulary of grant documentation that Marcus's team operated in fluently. He said so directly to Marcus in his second week, which Marcus seemed to appreciate enough that he assigned him 2 hours a week with the Foundation's operations manager, a precise and patient woman named Yvonne, who had the gift of explaining bureaucratic systems to people who didn't naturally speak them. He learned. It was slower than he'd like, but he learned. Victoria came to the Foundation office twice in his first month, not to see him specifically. She had board obligations in Marcus's regular reporting updates, but he saw her both times. And both times the interaction was professional and brief, and contained the particular mild awkwardness of two people maintaining a distinction in a context where the distinction was real but also slightly artificial. The second time she came by his desk on her way out and said quietly, "How is it going?" "Ask me in 6 months," he said. That's not an answer. "It's an honest answer," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the particular expression that meant she was calibrating something. "Okay," she said. 6 months. She left. He watched the elevator doors close and turned back to the case file he'd been working through before she came over, which was a family of 5 in Lawndale, with 3 overlapping service gaps and a landlord situation that was going to require a legal referral he'd been building the documentation for all afternoon. He called her that Tuesday, the way he always did. "How's the Lawndale case?" she asked, which surprised him because he hadn't mentioned it to her. "How do you know about it?" "Marcus mentioned it in his weekly summary," she said. "He said you'd identified a habitability issue that the family's previous caseworker had missed." "It wasn't that the caseworker missed it," he said. "They didn't have the right referral network. The problem was in the system, not the person." A pause. "That's a generous read." "It's an accurate read," he said. "The same gap would have caught anyone working that caseload." She was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be a recurring problem," she said. "The referral network gap. It's not just Lawndale." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about that." "Tell me," she said, and there was a quality in those 2 words that he'd come to recognize. Not the CEO tone, not the managed attention of the office, but genuine interest, the kind that actually wanted what came next. He told her what he'd been thinking about, not in the language of a proposal or a presentation, but in the working it out as he said it way he'd started to trust around her, knowing she'd follow the logic without requiring it to be packaged first. She asked 3 questions, 2 of which pointed at gaps in his thinking that he hadn't seen, and 1 of which pointed at something she'd tried 3 years ago in a different program context that had failed for reasons she explained with the analytical honesty of someone who learned from failures rather than erasing them. They talked for an hour and 15 minutes. Somewhere in the middle of it, the conversation shifted, as it always did in these calls, from the work to other things. She'd been to a board dinner the previous Thursday that had gone poorly in a particular way she described with the dry understatement of someone who found social performance taxing and had gotten very good at surviving it. He told her about Mrs. Okafor, who had begun teaching Lily to play a card game she described as a traditional Nigerian game, and which Lily had taken to with a ferocity that suggested she would be defeating adults at it within the month. "She's competitive," Victoria said. "Extremely," he said. She beat me at Uno last week and did a victory lap around the kitchen table. What did you do? I let her, he said. She'd earned it. Victoria laughed. The full version now, not the short, surprised one from early on. He'd learned the difference. March came and went. April. The foundation work deepened into something he was starting to call, privately, a vocation. Not just a job, but a thing that used more of him than he'd expected and returned more than he put in, which was the definition of something worth doing. The referral network gap became a formal proposal that he wrote with Yvonne's help and presented to Marcus in early April. Marcus took it to the board in May. Victoria abstained from the vote, which she disclosed to the board up front as a conflict of interest, and the proposal passed 4-1, which Marcus told him with the neutral tone of someone delivering good news without making a performance of it. The one dissenting vote was a board member named Gerald Hatch, who Ethan had never met but whose name had come up twice in other contexts as someone who felt the foundation operated too far outside its original scope. Ethan filed this information and said nothing. He took Lily to Monteverde again in April, this time for her 7th birthday dinner, which she'd requested specifically and which Sandra marked by bringing out a small chocolate cake with a candle she hadn't ordered, which made Lily go still with the particular overwhelmed stillness of a child who wasn't expecting kindness and didn't know yet how to hold it gracefully. "Thank you," Lily said to Sandra, very seriously. 7 is a significant number, Sandra said, equally seriously, which was exactly the right response. On the walk back to the van, Lily carrying a small box with the cake's second half, which Sandra had insisted she take, Lily said, "Is Victoria your girlfriend?" He looked at her sideways. "Why are you asking that?" "Because you talk to her every Tuesday," she said, "and sometimes on other days, and you look different when you're talking to her." "Different how?" She considered this. "Like when you're working on something and it's going well," she said. "Like the face you make when the machine works." He thought about that. "We're friends," he said. Lily accepted this with the equanimity of a 7-year-old who has filed the information and will return to it later. "Can I meet her sometime?" she said. "Maybe," he said. "Is that the actual plan, maybe, or the say it so I feel okay, maybe?" "The actual plan, maybe," he said. She seemed satisfied with this and turned her attention back to protecting the cake box from the April wind. He told Victoria about the conversation on Tuesday. A pause on her end. "What did you say?" "I said maybe," he said. Another pause, longer. "Do you want her to meet me?" "Yeah," he said. "I do, when it's right." "How will you know when it's right?" "I'll know," he said. "Same way I know when a repair is done. Not because the clock says it's done, but because the thing is actually working." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm nervous about that," she said, which was the most unguarded thing she'd said to him in months. And she said it with the flatness of someone reporting a fact about themselves rather than asking for reassurance. "I know," he said. "She might not like me," she said. "She might not," he said. "You're not immediately easy to warm up to." "That's honest." "You asked for honest," he said. "I did," she said. "I did ask for that." A pause. "What do you think the odds are?" "That she likes you?" He thought about it. "Better than you think. She responds to people who are straight with her. She's been raised by someone who values that." "You," she said. "Me," he said. "And Mrs. Okafor, who is probably the most direct person I've ever met." "High standard," she said. "You can clear it," he said. And he meant it. Passant. They met on a Saturday in June, which arrived the way Chicago Junes arrived. Sudden and certain, the cold gone, like it had been a rumor. The city opening up with the relieved energy of people who'd been compressed for months and were finally released. He told Lily they were meeting a friend for lunch. He told Victoria the same. He hadn't over-explained or over-prepared either of them, because over-preparation was a way of managing anxiety by controlling the event, and he'd decided he didn't want to control this one. They went to a restaurant in Lincoln Square that wasn't Monteverde. He wanted neutral ground, a place that wasn't weighted with the history of other conversations. A corner table, accessible, good light. Lily arrived at the table first, having been to the bathroom. Victoria was already seated. Lily came around the corner with the direct, assessing gaze of a 7-year-old who'd been waiting to form an opinion and was now collecting data. She looked at Victoria, at the wheelchair, at the table. At Victoria again. You're Victoria, she said. I am, Victoria said. You're Lily. Yes, Lily said, and sat down with the composed decisiveness of someone who had made a social calculation and resolved it. My dad says you run a company. I do, Victoria said, and a foundation that helps families. What's a foundation? An organization that takes money from people who have too much of it and uses it to help people who don't have enough, Victoria said, which was the most direct possible answer and exactly the right one. Lily considered this. That sounds fair, she said. It's supposed to be, Victoria said. Ethan sat down. He looked at Victoria across the table and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment because there wasn't anything to say. The moment was what it was, and adding language to it would have been a reduction. Lunch lasted 2 hours. Lily talked about school, about the cardboard veterinary hospital, which had expanded to 3 buildings, about the card game she'd learned from Mrs. Okafor, which she offered to teach Victoria, and which Victoria accepted with the seriousness of someone who did not underestimate 7-year-olds. They made a plan for Lily to bring the cards the next time they met, which was settled between them as a concrete future thing rather than a vague possibility, which Lily seemed to regard as a done deal and promptly moved on from. Victoria ordered the salmon. Lily approved of this. At one point, Lily said, "Do you like fixing things, or do you just run the foundation?" Victoria looked at her. "I run the company mostly," she said, "but what I like is understanding how systems fail and figuring out what lever to move to fix them." Lily turned to Ethan. "That's the same as you," she said. "I know," he said. Lily looked between them with the expression of someone who has just confirmed a hypothesis. She appeared pleased by this and returned to her food. On the way home, Lily was quiet for half a block and then said, "She's serious, but she's not mean." "Yeah," he said, "she really listened when I talked about the veterinary hospital, like she actually wanted to know." "She did," he said. Lily nodded. "Okay," she said, which was her form of endorsement, unembellished and complete. In September, 11 months after a rainy Tuesday morning on Michigan Avenue, Ethan sat in a meeting room on the 12th floor of the foundation building and presented the full framework for what had become the Family Systems Initiative, a restructured referral network connecting foundation-enrolled families with legal aid, housing advocacy, employment services, and healthcare in a coordinated rather than siloed way. It was the formalization of what he'd been building since February, and it had required 6 months of relationship building with partner organizations, 3 grant applications, 2 structural fights with the Foundation's existing database system, and 1 very long argument with Gerald Hatch about scope that Ethan had won not by outmaneuvering him but by being right and being patient and waiting for Marcus to see it the same way. Victoria was at the board table. She was a board member. She was supposed to be there, but he was aware of her presence in the room with the particular awareness of someone who knew how to work alongside a person without being governed by the fact of them. He presented for 22 minutes. He answered questions for another 40. Gerald Hatch had 2 objections. One of them was valid, and Ethan acknowledged it directly and explained how the framework addressed it. The other was not valid, and Ethan said so without hedging, which produced a brief silence in the room and then Marcus nodding slightly. The board approved the initiative 6-0. Gerald Hatch abstained, which was better than a no. After the meeting, in the hallway, Victoria said, "The Hatch exchange." "Yeah?" "You were right to hold your ground on the second objection." "I know," he said. "I was going to say something," she said. "Before you answered, I almost intervened." He looked at her. "But you didn't." "But I didn't," she said, "because you didn't need me to." He looked at her for a moment, in the hallway of the foundation that existed in a building separate from her building that operated by its own design, that he had spent 7 months making more functional than he'd found it. "Thank you," he said, "for not intervening." "It was hard," she said, and she said it honestly, which was the same as saying she was still learning how to let things be handled by the people who should handle them. "I know," he said. "You're getting better at it." "Slowly," she said. "Slowly is fine," he said. "Slowly means it sticks." She looked at him with the expression she'd had across the restaurant table the night they'd had dinner at Monteverde, 11 months ago. Something that wasn't quite named but had been present long enough now that it had settled, become a feature of the landscape between them rather than a question hovering above it. "Dinner tonight?" she said. "Sandra's. I made a reservation." "Yeah," he said. 7 o'clock. 7, she confirmed, and went back into the meeting room to finish the board's administrative business. And he went back to his desk and the afternoon's work. There is something people don't tell you about trust. Or maybe they do tell you and you don't hear it until you've lived it. They tell you trust is built slowly. They tell you it requires honesty and consistency and time. That part is true. But what they don't say is that trust isn't a structure you build and then have. It's something you keep choosing, past the point where the choice feels remarkable, into the ordinary daily territory where most of the choosing actually happens. Victoria Hale had spent 2 years after Daniel Ashworth building systems to protect herself from the cost of misplaced trust. She'd built them with the same precision she brought to infrastructure technology, airtight, controlled, optimized for safety. And they had worked, in the narrow sense that they had kept her safe. They had also kept her alone, which she had decided was the acceptable trade-off. Ethan Walker had spent 4 years carrying a weight that nobody quite saw because he'd gotten too good at carrying it. He'd built his own system, self-sufficiency raised to something close to ideology, the refusal to ask for help elevated to identity. It had kept him functional. It had also kept him contained in a life that was smaller than the one he was capable of. Neither of them had fixed these things about themselves. They were both still, in various ways, works in progress, imperfect people working against their own defaults with varying degrees of success. Victoria still moved too fast to conclusions about other people's situations. Ethan still held things too long before saying them. They disagreed about foundation strategy twice in the first 6 months, with enough heat that Marcus, on one occasion, quietly left the room and came back when it was over. They were not easy together in the frictionless sense. But friction, applied correctly, is how things get refined. What they had built, in the space between a rainy sidewalk and a 19th floor office, and a restaurant on Monroe Street and 100 Tuesday phone calls and a 7-year-old's assessment over salmon, was not a story about one person saving another. It was something smaller and more durable than that. It was two people who had each stopped trusting in different ways, finding in the other a reason to start again. That's not a dramatic thing when you're in the middle of it. There's no single moment where it becomes true. It becomes true in the accumulation of ordinary moments, in the dinner reservation made without discussion, in the board meeting where one person didn't intervene, in the Tuesday calls that had long since stopped being necessary and had become something else entirely. It becomes true in a 7-year-old saying she's serious but she's not mean, and going back to her food. It becomes true in a man standing in the rain for 12 seconds, making a private choice, not because anyone was watching, or rather, not knowing that anyone was, which is the same thing, because a private choice is the only kind that actually tells you who you are. Ethan had stood in the rain and picked up a wallet and decided what kind of man he was going to be that day. He'd been making that decision every day for 32 years without calling it that. Most people do. Most people don't recognize their own moral history as a history because it's made of moments that feel too ordinary to count. But they count. They counted here, on a sidewalk in October, in the rain. One choice, made without audience or reward, pulled two broken in different ways people into each other's orbit and held them there long enough to find out what they were made of. Victoria had been wrong about the test. Not wrong that integrity is worth finding, but wrong about the method. Wrong to believe you could manufacture a moment of truth and harvest it cleanly. The truth is messier than that. It comes sideways, in conversations you didn't plan to have, in admissions you didn't intend to make, in the expression on a man's face when he talks about the woman who kept books she wasn't ready to give up. She told him the truth about the wallet because she couldn't not. Because she'd already done to him what had been done to her, and she'd recognized it, and recognition without action is just another kind of cowardice. The truth had cost her the clean outcome she'd engineered. It had produced something better, which is usually what happens when you stop trying to engineer and start trying to be honest. Ethan understood, by September, that the thing that had happened to him on that rainy Tuesday, that private 12-second decision, was not the beginning of a story about being rewarded for good behavior. That's not how the world works, and any story that tells you it is selling you something. The world does not reliably reward the honest person. It does not balance the scales with precision. It is indifferent to the moral quality of your choices in the large mechanistic sense. But the choices are still yours. That's the thing. Whatever comes after, whatever the outcome, the choice you make in the 12 seconds when nobody is watching, or when you think nobody is watching, that belongs to you. It is the truest information about who you are, and you carry it with you, and it shapes the next choice, and the one after that, until you have built, without noticing, the architecture of a self. Ethan Walker's architecture had been built mostly in private, in hard years, in the daily maintenance of a life that required more from him than it gave back. He hadn't called it that. He'd called it getting through. But getting through with integrity, day after day, is not nothing. It is, in fact, the only way to be someone you can trust. Victoria Hale had learned, late and by loss, that control is a response to fear, not a solution to it. She had built a fortress and lived in it and called it competence. And then a man had walked into her office to return her wallet and had looked at her without pity and without the particular deference that most people paid to her title and her wealth and even to her chair, had looked at her like a person looking at another person. And the fortress had developed, quietly, a crack. Not a collapse, just a crack. Enough to let something through. That was enough. That's always enough. You don't need the walls to come down. You just need one crack wide enough for light to get in, and then you have to be brave enough to let it. So, on a Thursday evening in late September, Ethan picked Lily up from school and drove to Monteverde, where Victoria was already at their corner table by the window, the one Sandra kept for them now, without being asked. Lily burst through the door in the way she burst through most doors, decisively, with full commitment to the direction she was heading, and saw Victoria and went straight to her. "I brought the cards," she said, dropping her backpack on the seat next to Victoria and pulling out a battered deck. "I've been practicing. I'm going to win." "I've been practicing too," Victoria said. Lily looked at her with narrow-eyed assessment. "You haven't," she said. "You're right," Victoria said. "I haven't, but I learn fast." Lily seemed to find this an acceptable response and began shuffling the cards with the confident incompetence of a 7-year-old who had decided she knew how to shuffle. Several cards went sideways. She collected them without embarrassment. Ethan sat down across from them. Sandra appeared and poured water without being asked, looked at the card situation with equanimity, and left them to it. He watched his daughter explain the rules to Victoria with the particular combination of authority and inaccuracy of a child teaching something she herself had learned recently. Victoria listened with the quality of attention she gave to everything, complete, without her phone, without the part of her that was usually managing something else running in the background. He'd watched that background managing part quiet down over the months. It wasn't gone, but it had learned to wait. He thought about the wallet. He thought about the rain. He thought about 12 seconds. He thought about what you build, without knowing you're building it, when you keep choosing the same kind of person to be. He thought about Claire's bookshelves in the second bedroom and the fact that last month, for the first time, he'd taken a book from one of them and read it. He'd sat in the chair by the window on a Sunday afternoon and read for 2 hours without planning to, the way you do when a book finds you at the right moment. It had been one of the poetry ones, the kind Claire read like it was useful information. He'd understood, reading it, why she'd kept it. He hadn't gotten rid of anything, but he'd started to use it. That was something. Lily was winning the card game with the focused satisfaction of someone who has been preparing for this moment. Victoria was losing with more grace than Ethan had expected, and slightly less than she believed she was displaying. He watched them, and let the evening be what it was. Imperfect, real, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself as significant, but that you'll carry for a long time. Outside the window, Chicago moved in its September way, the last of the good light going gold over the river, the city in the brief season between the heat and the cold when it was simply itself, neither suffering nor celebrating, just existing in the full weight of what it was. Lily won the first game and looked across the table at Victoria with the expression of someone waiting to see how victory is received. Victoria looked back at her. "Again," she said. Lily grinned. Ethan picked up the cards and began to shuffle them, badly, which made Lily immediately try to take over, which he didn't let her, which produced the exact brief argument he'd been trying to start. It was a regular evening. It was a Thursday in September. Nobody was performing anything for anyone. That was the whole of it. That was more than enough.